Lord of Industrialization. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 276, Rejecting the Emperor's Invitation and Slipping Away. Ouch, it hurts, bear with it, it'll go away after I take the medicine. No, it hurts even after the medicine, then what should I do? A kiss will make it go away. Frederick, feeling like he was just looking for trouble, went to the treatment room to check on Carly after the match. He was surprised to see her displaying affection with her husband. The doctor working on her bones tried not to look at them. Carly had recovered to about 50, while her husband looked about 50, nearly 7.2 meters tall and weighing about 160 kilograms. His muscular build, barely concealed by a layer of fat, combined with his menacing appearance, was quite intimidating. Seeing their affectionate expressions, Frederick hesitated about going in. While anything could happen in the ring, if the family members were unreasonable, he'd be in big trouble. "Oh, Mr. Smith is here to see you." It was Carly's husband who spotted him first. Frederick stood at the doorway and asked, "How's Ms. Carly's injury?" "Nothing," Carly replied dejectedly. "That damn old woman, not only did she get married, but she actually spread this magic around. It pissed me off." Frederick raised a brow. He had just used Tony's iron shirt spell at the last moment to harden his hand, which had caused Carly's leg to break like a steel bar. This magic was passed down from Tony's ancestors who married a female magician from the witch sisterhood. It sounded like Carly understood the inheritance, so she must be a member of the witch sisterhood. Carly continued to speak indignantly, "I have a backup plan. Humph, I bought my own championship. Now that the money is gone, how am I going to live?" She then burst into tears. Her husband said to Frederick, "Don't worry about it. She only bought a gold coin. It's nothing, isn't a gold coin money?" Carly suddenly glared at her husband. Seeing this, Frederick smiled and said, "I'll treat you to dinner later." He had some connections to the witch sisterhood, and Psyche had a good relationship with the organization. Artisha from the organization was currently working with him to dig for fire crystals on Cod Island, so overall, the relationship was friendly. Carly looked at Frederick nervously and asked, "Are you attracted to me?" "I already have a husband and 2 children, Frederick said, feeling both amused and helpless. How could that be possible? This made Carly even more nervous, and she trembled as she asked, "Are you attracted to my husband?" Frederick replied grumpily, "I captured the man who summoned the fire elemental giant and used him for a few years." You see, Carly immediately understood and turned to her husband. "Amphitheater, eat as much as you can tonight." He's a wealthy man, her husband. Amphitheater, gave Frederick a helpless smile. The doctor quickly set Carly's broken leg, applied a cast, and gave her a bottle of gray potion to drink. "You'll be able to walk tomorrow morning," the doctor said. "You'll probably feel a crawling sensation around the fracture in the middle of the night, but don't worry, just bear with it. Drink plenty of milk or goat's milk tonight, and eat plenty of fish and shrimp from the sea," Karis said to Frederick. "Did you hear that?" "Milk and fish and shrimp," Frederick replied, both amused and embarrassed. Yes, yes." Soon they arrived at a famous seafood restaurant in the city. Amphitheater held Karis in his arms, and many women praised his daughter's beauty. Olive was having guests today, and she took her place, serving dishes and pouring water in an orderly manner. Frederick asked the waiter to prepare a portion for her in the lobby, then chatted with Karis and the others. Karis and Amphitheater's child had recently turned adult, so they went out to spend the day together, traveling extensively. Their itinerary was the opposite of Frederick's, heading north. Halfway through the meal, an unexpected guest appeared. Will, beaming, arrived at the top floor and handed Frederick and Carly a bag of gold coins each. The bag was made of silk and contained exactly 100 coins. Carly placed the bag on the table and asked Will expressionlessly, "What do you mean?" Will replied, "You two performed brilliantly today. My master is delighted. This is a reward for you." Carly refused to accept the money, but continued, "If that's all, I'll be yours. It's a good thing we lost a match, and we'll leave Wanjing City tomorrow morning." Will quickly replied, "This is just a reward, nothing more. Actually, my master has a request for you two. If you succeed, the reward will be several times what you gave me today. Carly, with a look of astonishment, sneered, if you have anything to ask, don't mention you need my husband's help with childbirth. Frederick saw Wheel's face twitch. Frederick had been silent since Wheel's arrival. He was a member of the Ghazi Empire's Imperial Guard, and his master was the Ghazi Empire's new emperor, Fatih. The Ghazi Empire was brimming with talent, and now the emperor was seeking outsider help. Clearly, it wasn't a good idea. Will told Carly, Bamo Island has been occupied by a sea monster for years. My master is planning to gather a force to defeat it and explore the Apocalypse Labyrinth. Carly frowned and asked, will it be just the two of us? Judging from her expression, that place probably wasn't a safe one. Will replied, no, the master will select a group of participants from this tournament, along with some of our own. Carly nodded thoughtfully, pointing to her injured leg. Let's see if my leg can heal in time. If we participate, my husband and I will get 2 cuts of the money. She didn't explicitly agree or refuse, but instead found an irrefutable excuse. Will glanced at Amphitheater, who towered over 2 heads, and could tell she was formidable. He said, no problem. When Will looked at Frederick, he said, I'll decide after the match. I injured someone today, but who knows, I might be the one injured next time, but I don't trust you. You must ensure I don't make a meaningless sacrifice. To put it bluntly, don't use me as bait, or even if I die, the Wesson army will come and seek justice for me. His expression was calm as he finished his words, his tone devoid of threats, yet his confidence gave the others the assurance that his words would come true. Will immediately said sincerely, my master intends to recruit you and would never do such a thing. Surprised, Frederick asked, really? Will replied, if you're interested, you can come to the tournament tomorrow to watch the fight with my master. Frederick thought for a moment and said seriously, I'll visit you tomorrow after I wake up. Will felt he had accomplished his mission well and did not interrupt their meal. After a while, Collies asked Frederick in a strange language, what do you think? She used the secret code of the Witch Sisterhood, which Frederick had learned a little. He replied, this man is an officer of the Imperial Guard. His master can only be the Emperor. Collies and Amphitheater's expressions changed for a moment, then quickly returned to normal. We'll leave tomorrow morning, Collies whispered. Anything associated with those jackals is bad news. I suggest you leave quickly too. Frederick nodded. Upon reaching adulthood, the princes of the Ghazi Empire were assigned to various regions. The first prince to return to the palace after the emperor's death inherited the throne, while the others were sent to remote and impoverished areas to support local development. There were many tricks involved, from bribing court officials to suppress information to deploying forces to ambush their brothers and prevent them from being ambushed themselves. They would do anything to secure the throne. Emperors bred in this environment were naturally cunning, and it was hard to expect them to abide by any boundaries. The offer looked appealing, but refusing it would likely result in arrest, torture, and interrogation of Wesson's secrets. Frederick wasn't about to risk his life. He had to flee when it was time. Everyone finished their meal calmly and went home. Frederick asked Carly and the others to report their safety if they passed through Wesson. As they approached the house, Frederick spotted a figure hiding outside the doorway. He tossed a copper coin at the figure, unsheathed his sword, and had Olive take cover behind him. I mean no harm. A black-robed figure emerged from the shadows, their voice indistinguishable between male and female. Frederick said coldly, do you think I believe you? The figure produced a bag and whispered, here are 500 gold coins, 100 more than the stakes and prize money you'd receive if you won the championship. We simply ask you to lose the next match. Frederick sneered, realizing someone was trying to gain access to the emperor's power. With an idea in mind, he said, pour the gold coins onto the ground. The figure did as he was told. Frederick said, go ahead. I'll do the job after I pay you. After the black-robed man left, Frederick took off his vest and took the wallet on the ground. After entering the house, Frederick asked Olive, do you know where there is a printing place in the city? The nobles were not unfamiliar with wax seals. After the emergence of Wesson paper, woodblock printing inspired by wax seals also appeared in other places. The printing quality and efficiency were not as good as those of professional printing factories in Wesson State, but printing some leaflets was no problem. The next morning, Emperor Fatih of the Ghazi Empire looked at the leaflets in his hand with a gloomy face. These leaflets were scattered around the arena early this morning. The leaflets read, I have received 400 gold coins today. I now withdraw from the warrior competition according to the agreement. Please do not hurt my friends, unknown person. Chapter 277 Chatting at Sea. The wind was blowing south, and the sailboats, leaving Wanjing City and heading southwest, had to follow a zigzag course, slowing down their speed. There was no boredom at sea. Traveling merchants gathered under the sunshade to brag, not just to pass the time, but to catch up on news from all over. The main attraction these days was a young merchant in his early 20s, fresh from a trip to the North Sea. He sported a newly grown mustache, earning everyone the nickname Mustache, since they were all casual acquaintances, and some had to keep their whereabouts secret. They rarely addressed each other by name, using nicknames instead. Several of the merchants on board had seen Frederick play, earning him the nickname 250, as soon as the mustache-faced man finished explaining the Dawn Merchant's 10-day business news, available at any port in the North Sea, which listed commodity prices in many places. The bald man asked Frederick, "Hey, 250? Is that true?" Frederick smiled and replied, "Of course it's true. I heard some people even bring it to the inland sea to sell. It's a bit slow, but it's still a good reference." The merchants gathered on the deck were envious. With such a comprehensive view of commodity prices, it would be hard to lose money. The bald man sighed. "It would be great if we had that in the inland sea as well." Frederick sighed and said, "It's a bit difficult. Duke Wessenland sent people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to negotiate with various places last year, but only the Kingdom of Kosh and the Southern Kingdom of Sardinia were willing to build long-distance radio towers on the coast." He then explained the purpose of the radio station to the merchants and how it could be used to collect and transmit commodity prices from various places. His explanation was clear and easy to understand, and everyone immediately understood. "Huh?" a scarred man asked in surprise. "If it's so good, why aren't other countries willing to build it?" Frederick shrugged and said helplessly, "It's the Venetian Doge and his people. They're afraid that if everyone understood local prices, they wouldn't be able to exploit their lack of information and gouge customers, so they're spreading rumors." The bald man said seriously, "That's true. I heard a Venetian merchant say that after the tower was built, the people in that city would only have daughters. I thought it was true at first, but it turns out they're afraid we'll make money." To merchants, anyone who prevents them from making money is a bad person. Nothing they say is true. A bearded man said angrily, "So that's how it is. That Venetian Doge should be hanged." Everyone began to denounce the Venetian Doge. Frederick just smiled helplessly. Similar things had happened in the North Sea region, but that was a key area of investment for the Wessenland state, and the abundance of popular science books quickly eliminated the rumors space among those in real power. Everyone chatted for a while, and soon it was noon. Today is Sunday in the Church of Flame. Except for the crew members who are operating the ship, everyone, including all of who is helping to mend clothes in the room, comes out to pray on the deck. Frederick is a pagan, so he goes back to his room to avoid the sun. In the afternoon, everyone gathers together to chat again. This time, there is a stove in the middle, and tea is brewing in it. There are also a lot of maltose and fruits, which taste quite good. The recipe of maltose has been made public, but soon after, the sweeter white crystal sugar appeared in Wessenland state, and Wessenland sugar also became the name of white sugar. Maltose is now a relatively cheap sugar, and white sugar is a luxury. The most expensive cargo on the ship this time is the small half-ship of white sugar that Mustache brought back from Wessenland state. While drinking tea, the bearded man tentatively asked Frederick, "Idiot, how are those crystal-like Wessenland candies made?" Frederick took a sip of the sour and sweet tea with a hint of bitterness, and said with a smile, "It's made by squeezing the juice of sweet radish. Sugar beets are grown everywhere, and people are familiar with them." The bearded man asked in surprise, "Is it really sweet radish?" Frederick took another sip of tea. "It's hot and you sweat a lot, so you need to drink more water." Then he said, "That's for sure. Everyone in our place knows it." The bearded man said thoughtfully, "Then I'll try it too." Frederick shook his head and said, "Don't blame me for not reminding you. The difference between sweet radish and sweet radish is greater than that between humans and slimes. It's like killing pigs and refining oil. Some pigs have oil only 1 finger thick, and some pigs have oil 3 fingers thick. We now have oil as thick as a palm. You know what I mean." The bearded man understood immediately after hearing it, and his face looked a little ugly. The bald guy next to him immediately laughed at him. "What are you thinking about? Can you compare with Wessenland state in farming? What do you use to plow the land?" "They use iron oxen," the man with the mustache also said. "That's right. The iron ox retains water and eats magic crystals. It works fast and well. It doesn't need to rest during the farming season. Can your cows do that? Also, the cows in Wesson State are fed to the farmers. If you feed too little, they won't grow fast enough, and if you feed too much, they will die of stuffing. Do you know how to feed? The bearded man was very angry and said indignantly, "Huh? I don't know anything. Can't I let my sons learn it? If they can't learn it, I will break their legs." The bald guy continued to taunt, "You are dreaming. That is their secret. If you go there, you will be a pagan. How can they teach you? I'm afraid you will break your legs as soon as you open your mouth." After the taunt, the guy asked Frederick, "You idiot, don't you think so?" Frederick smiled and said no, which immediately confused the bald guy, and the people around him laughed. Frederick drank his tea and said, "You can learn, but don't say you are a pagan. What is not taught in the University of Wessenberg now? Just don't preach or fight and you'll be fine. Planting is a university course. Outsiders have to take a unified exam to enter the university. If you don't get a good score, even the Duke of Wesson can't say anything." Also, Wesson Canton is in the north, and they teach northern plants, which are different from the south, but it's good to go there to study. The basic principles of plant growth are the same. When you come back, study the local crops, and you should be able to have a good harvest. The bearded man immediately said to him, "Hey, you are really open-minded, unlike some people." The group of people laughed again, and the big bald man was speechless. The bearded man asked curiously, "Is that iron ox really that good?" Frederick thought for a moment, then pinched his chin and said, "I remember quite a few tractors were sold to the Kingdom of Kush. You could go and ask around." Scarface then jumped in, "I know. They did buy quite a few, but they're all used on the royal farms. I heard His Majesty Yuan is planning to reclaim the swamps in the Sun River Delta and is planning to buy more iron oxen." Frederick was now intrigued. He had never heard of this before, so he asked Scarface to elaborate. Scarface had a relative who was in charge of water conservancy in the Kingdom of Kush. It was said that the king, believing that Duke Wesson had reclaimed so much swampland in the lowlands, was sure he could do the same. So, he planned to reclaim the swamps in the Sun River Delta where it flows into the inland sea. If successful, they could acquire nearly 10,000 square kilometers of fertile farmland. Frederick nodded thoughtfully. Once the gas explosion engine went into mass production, there would be a place to sell those used steam tractors. Others also began to ask about Scarface's matter. There were extremely high commercial interests behind the large-scale reclamation of farmland. Even if they couldn't afford it themselves, they could still do favors for big businessmen. Chapter 278: Boarding the Ship to New Life. The layout of the hotel rooms in Wesson State was different from other hotels. The bathroom was next to the entrance, and the luggage storage was opposite. A short hallway led to the room with a bed, table, and chairs. A light-filled window was covered by a double curtain, one thick and one thin. A map of the fire escape was posted on the back of the door, a tribute paid for at the cost of over 100 lives in Oak City. Olive sat on the bed, pressed the mattress, and it bounced back, a delightful experience. This mattress is a specialty of the Kingdom of Kush, made from a palm fiber grown in the hot southern regions. Originally used for crude clothing and rope, its creation was the idea of the man in the room who was poring over a map. Frederick was studying a newly purchased map. This place felt both familiar and strange to him. The terrain of this world's southern continent was similar to his native Africa, but the Sahara Desert was located in a tropical rainforest known as the Sea of Land or the Green Sea. Cities were scattered along the northern coast, and south of the rainforest lay a mountain range and plateau of considerable height. The port of Bethsa, where they were currently, lay in the northeastern corner of the territory effectively controlled by the Kingdom of Kush, corresponding to the northern end of the Suez Canal. The Luna Peninsula to the east was occupied by the Ghazi Empire, and the two countries now faced off across a nearly 200-kilometer-long marshland, with occasional skirmishes. The Kingdom of Kush's territory roughly matched that of his native Egypt, but the great river known as the Sun River differed from the Nile. Its mainstream flowed from the mountains to the south, but countless tributaries flowed into it from the forests to the west and the hilly areas to the east. While the region was abundant in water and sunlight, seemingly suitable for farming, the tropical rainforests were also spreading. In just a few days, seeds carried by bird droppings could sprout from farmland into small trees taller than a wheat or rice plant. The situation in the cotton fields was even worse, and it was difficult to tell at first glance. Further complicating matters was the hot climate and the insects that infested ponds and lakes, which spread human and animal diseases. These insects and small reptiles were generally toxic, and even the slimes here, from consuming so many poisonous insects, became toxic themselves. After assembling past and current intelligence, Frederick had a general understanding of the country and decided not to seek out Madame Sophie. Instead, he explored the area on his own. Someone knocked forcefully on the door. Frederick, alert, drew his weapon, and approached. He used his scabbard to pry aside the curtain behind the peephole, then slowly approached after a few seconds. The door continued to bang. Outside, several men in khaki police uniforms emerged. If their uniforms had been navy blue, and their skin white instead of the local brown, they would have resembled the police from Wesson. Frederick shouted in standard Germanic with a Wessenberg accent, "Who is it?" There was a knock at the door, and someone answered in Germanic, with a local accent, "Security officer." Checking the room, Frederick asked again, "Are you really a sheriff? Not a charlatan, are you?" The person outside politely replied, "No, we are real sheriffs. I graduated from the police academy in Wessenberg." Frederick nodded slightly. Due to the professionalization reforms he had initiated, various government departments in Wessenberg were in dire need of qualified personnel. Many had established their own specialized training schools. The Ministry of Police had also opened a police academy, offering 6 months of pre-job training and 3 months of advanced training. Like many similar schools, it recruited experienced officers who shared their experience with the newcomers while developing the curriculum. These schools were also open to allies, and the Kingdom of Kush had also sent students. These were children of noble families who supported Lady Sophie but had no claim to title. They would return to serve in other regions to strengthen government departments and strengthen the royal family's control over the region. Frederick was still uneasy. This was a border region, and there might be spies from the Ghazi Empire infiltrating, impersonating government officials. If the Kush Kingdom's sheriff killed someone from Wesson, it could easily escalate to the diplomatic level. Standard Wessenberg City Police curse, Frederick suddenly yelled, "Were you involved when you blue rats came to our school to steal vegetables last year?" The sheriff outside immediately cursed back, "Not standard Wessenberg curse. It's big-faced cats. Open the door and see how I'll deal with you. How dare you be so arrogant on my land?" The Wesson Police Academy was located in the suburbs, not far from the Black Cat Corps new recruit training base. Frederick, in keeping with the military's tradition of cultivating vegetables, had a vegetable patch at the base. Last year, a group of police academy students tried to steal vegetables and were severely beaten. Frederick opened the door and exchanged a 5-minute exchange of words with the sheriff outside. Olive, in the room, shivered in the corner. The security guard in the hallway was bewildered. Why was the officer only threatening today, not taking action? After the exchange, Frederick sneered at the officer's sheriff's ID. "How many days did you have to lie down that time?" The officer didn't respond, but said, "The Queen and the eldest prince will be back to visit their parents in a few days. If you see anyone suspicious, tell us immediately." Frederick raised an eyebrow. Besides, after a few years, they'd be considered relatives, so it was okay to keep an eye on them. Frederick then called Olive over for a checkup, concluding the room inspection. "Are you free tomorrow night?" the sheriff asked. "I'm calling some classmates over for a drink. We'd love to hear stories about the war." Frederick smiled and said, "No problem. I'm just here for a trip. If I'm not here, tell the front desk." The sheriff finished his inspection and led his men to the room across the street. After knocking for a long time, no one opened the door. Someone inside shouted, "Get out," and judging by the accent, it sounded like someone from the southern part of the Kingdom of Kush. It only took 30 seconds to break the door and arrest the people. A fat man and a young woman were dragged out, tied up, and sent back for interrogation. After the scorching sun at noon passed, Frederick took Olive to the street to buy things. Frederick had escaped from Wanjing City with Olive. She had no luggage with her and needed to do some shopping here. In recent years, the trade between Wesson State and the Kingdom of Kush has intensified. And there are more merchants. People speaking Germanic can be seen on the streets from time to time. Frederick asked along the way and came to a street with more tailor shops. There were shops that made local clothes and ready-made clothes imported from Wesson State. But no matter which side you choose, you will need a headscarf to block the sun. Frederick was still wearing loose and breathable clothes made in Wanjing City and a headscarf with a white background and black plaid. Frederick asked Olive, "What kind of clothes?" Olive replied matter-of-factly, "Wesson clothes." Of course, Frederick took her to a women's clothing store and let her choose. Then he asked the owner, "Do you have any cotton-padded clothes? Let the girl see. I'm worried she'll freeze to death this winter without buying any." The owner, only 2 or 3 years older than Frederick, had come here from Wesson and married a local woman. Although his fellow villager offered to help, he shook his head and replied, "It's so hot here, how could they possibly have cotton-padded clothes? I heard the travel agency on the next street has some. They made them specifically for people here after someone froze to death back home a few years ago." Frederick was stunned, wondering if there were even travel agencies. After buying the clothes, he took Olive along to look for them. He found that the travel agency had quite a lot of customers, all from the southern continent, and judging by their clothing, they all looked wealthy or aristocratic. As soon as he entered, the travel agency owner came to greet him. "Ah," Frederick glared, not wanting one of his father's former scribes to identify him. The owner immediately understood and ushered Frederick into the VIP room. Olive sat on the sofa, curiously gazing at the glass fish tank on the wall, which contained many beautiful fish. Frederick asked the owner curiously, "Did you open this chamber of commerce? It looks like business is doing well." The owner was a little embarrassed. He had once been in charge of copying at the castle. After Frederick's father died in battle, he felt the Wesson family was doomed and fled to Nuremberg. A few years later, that city also became the Wesson family's territory. Now that the printing industry was booming, the copyist's job was over, so he left to explore the world. The boss replied, "I started out selling tableware here, and then I heard that a lot of people wanted to visit Wesson State, but the distance was too far and the travel expenses were too expensive. Then I thought that the high travel expenses were mainly due to the expensive boat fare, so I found a captain I knew to cooperate with, and let tourists gather together to charter a boat. The fare is much cheaper, and there are more people." Frederick nodded after hearing this. These days, nobles have a tradition of traveling everywhere. He is traveling now as well, and the expenses in this regard are not small, so he tries to save as much as possible. He pointed at Olive and said to the boss, "You're capable of making this money. I met this girl on the road. She wants to work and live in Wesson. You can arrange her transportation, and once we get off the boat in Wessenberg, leave her alone." The boss immediately replied, "We have a boat back to Wessenberg in 3 days. You can take her with you. If she'd like to stay with a waiter, there's no travel expenses, just a meal fee. If you have anything to bring back. We also offer mail and gift delivery." Although Olive was now the wealthiest person in her life, he preferred not to spend money if possible. So he asked, "Can I get my meal for free if I help with the work?" The boss breathed a sigh of relief. He had initially thought the girl was the Duke's mistress, and that the stories of meeting her on the road and going to work were just excuses. But seeing the scars on her face, he was unsure, so he used this indirect approach to hint at the truth. If she was a mistress, the Duke would have said he would treat her as a regular guest. But the fact that the girl was volunteering to save money proved she was no longer a mistress. Even if she wasn't his mistress, she still knew him. There was always a rapport, and if the Duke suddenly remembered and asked about her, she'd have something to explain. So Olive's boss offered her a simple job. "If you can help wipe the dishes, we'll provide the working meals." Olive immediately agreed. 3 days later, the skinny Olive, carrying a backpack almost as big as herself, said goodbye to Frederick at the dock and happily ran aboard. As the ship departed, Frederick waved goodbye. Little did he know that the next time they saw each other, she was already a mother of 2. Chapter 279 Exaggerated Rumors. Frederick hadn't expected to become so famous in Kush. He'd become a storyteller during his days in Burzy Harbor. It started with a sheriff he'd met that day, inviting him for a drink and some bragging. The next day, they'd go about their work bragging about their news stories to others. That evening, several minor nobles in charge of the city's security invited Frederick to a banquet, simply to hear his stories. Frederick continued to brag, posing as Charles Smith, a member of Duke Wesson's guard. He first recounted his capture of Magiabeo and the capture of the Mahe River region by boat, then how Duke Wesson had single-handedly killed the god of magic, and finally, how he'd flooded his army. Then the story couldn't stop. Burzy Harbor was so small, and as news spread, invitations from other nobles and merchants poured in. Fortunately, the queen and her 1-year-old son arrived to visit his father and mother stationed there. The city's nobles, both high and low, were busy welcoming them, giving Frederick a break. Unexpectedly, the queen, upon hearing about his story, also wanted to hear his own tales. That afternoon, She invited Frederick to the Lord's mansion where she was staying for tea. Afternoon tea in Kirsch was different from that in the north. It was served under the cool shade of trees, on a luxurious carpet. Everyone sat or half reclined in the breeze, sipping tea and chatting. Queen Sami of Kush, Frederick's age, married young heir, and her 1-year-old son, Amir, sat on the carpet in front of her, playing with blocks. Also invited today were many young men and women from the city's nobility. They sat on either side of the carpet, with fruit and snacks placed in the center. A servant brewed tea in the downwind area, and before it was served, everyone chatted privately. This was Frederick's first time attending such a tea party, and he asked the old friends he had met a few days ago about the rules. There weren't many rules, really. Tea parties weren't as formal as banquets, they were just a group of people chatting and laughing. However, the host usually set a topic, and the two sides engaged in a debate or singing a duet. Frederick blinked at the last part, wondering why Susan and the others hadn't experienced something so fun back in Wesson. Tea was soon brewed. It wasn't tea, but rather a blended juice with tea. A straw stuck into a pound cup, it was sour and sweet, quite delicious. Now came the highlight of the day. Sami made an opening statement, then asked Frederick a question: doesn't the Duke of Wesson ever bathe? Does he only bathe in blood? Frederick fell silent. At first, he thought Sami was joking, but seeing her dark eyes beneath her veil, filled with curiosity and earnestness, as did the other ladies, he wondered if they really believed it. Not that much, Frederick smiled and shook his head. The commander bathes regularly, it's good for his health. Sami pretended to understand, saying seriously, so that's why. He only bathes in the blood of his enemies when he's at war. Frederick blinked, wanting to ask the young queen what was going on. Sami then curiously asked, does Duke Wesson put a pillow under his sword when he sleeps? Frederick was once again at a loss for words, wondering if sleeping like that wouldn't give him a headache. But that was only the beginning. Sami and the ladies beside her peppered him with questions, including and not limited to: did Duke Wesson once arm wrestle a saber-toothed elephant, using both of its front legs, and when? Does Duke Wesson never kill 2 birds with 1 stone, shooting a single arrow and killing an entire flock of birds? Does Duke Wesson never cry, or doesn't even have tear ducts? Sweat dripped down Frederick's forehead, and he wondered what rumors had spread about him. The least outrageous of them all was that his eyes could emit blazing rays. Even among the men, there were certain legends circulating, like the fastest way to a man's heart is Duke Wesson's knife. Frederick could only explain, but some of them were just yes, yes, yes. For example, someone asked, can Duke Wesson eat soup with a fork? He was too lazy to explain, he was tired. Everyone heard a rumor that was completely true, so they assumed the next question: didn't the Duke of Wesson take 10 seconds to kill a whale, with the first 9 seconds spent waiting for the whale to gather its courage to charge him? What else could Frederick say? Yes, 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 and that was it. After answering the question, Frederick launched into a discussion of the East Plain Restoration War, a name he'd only just learned in the past 2 days. Sami, however, wasn't particularly interested in the war, simply listening casually and teasing his son from time to time. Frederick noticed this and briefly finished the story. Soon, it was time for Sami to feed her child, and the tea party ended. Frederick was a little bummed that he hadn't eaten. He didn't bother complaining, though. He planned to leave in 2 days anyway. He'd follow the river upstream until he reached the mountains to the south, then head west within them for a while, then cross the forest from south to north. But before leaving, I had to buy some local specialties to send back to everyone, mainly to let them know I was safe. It was getting dark in the south, so many shops were still open. Frederick asked along the way and came to a shop selling local jewelry, where he found a lot of good things. There are many insects here, including many brightly colored and beautiful beetles, which the locals use to make jewelry. However, the rich people don't like this kind of beetle jewelry and disdain to wear it. Only families with a little wealth will buy it. For outsiders like Frederick, gold, silver and jewelry are indeed precious, but these local specialties are more attractive. He picked and picked, this one is good, that one is good, and he almost emptied the store. While paying, Frederick suddenly spotted a fishing rod behind the counter and asked the owner, is there anywhere to fish nearby? The owner, counting out his money, immediately replied, there's a lake and a river a few kilometers east of the city. The fish there are plentiful and fat, it's hot now. The fish stop biting around noon when the sun comes out. If you want to catch a big fish, you'll have to go at night. But the city gates are closed at night, So you'll have to leave in the evening and return when the gates open at dawn. Frederick agreed. It was so hot, the fish wouldn't bite at noon. He asked the owner what bait the fish would take. The owner said earthworms dug from the surface water would be enough. The owner was delighted to have made such a big deal today and told him there was a bridge on the river to the east, offering the best spot on either side. Frederick made a note of it, but he feared he wouldn't be able to catch it today. He had to go to the travel agency later to check in his luggage and gather some food. He would rest during the day and then set off in the evening. Chapter 280 No fish caught. New here, traveling, no wonder you're so rich. Your fishing rod is made of steel, haha, it's easy to carry, your position isn't very good, no problem. Frederick chatted with a fisherman next to him and began to cast his line. He didn't have much luggage. Besides his sword and weapons, he had a 130-liter travel bag. In addition to his clothes, the bag also contained a tent, raincoat, first aid kit, water bottle, stool, pots and pans, and other items. So his fishing rod was made of 4 hot-tip galvanized steel pipes connected by external connectors. It was over 2 meters long. In his previous life, it would have been mistaken for a water pipe in his hometown. He also had a steel plate in his backpack that could be used as a shield when needed. Connecting these 4 steel pipes made a small table. The fishing rod and shield were all made of elemental steel. If necessary, he could also attach a spearhead to it and use it as a spearman. Fortunately, he was now a supernatural warrior, so carrying so much stuff was not too heavy. The fisherman not far from Frederick was a small landowner in the area. Not far behind him, a servant lit the stove and cooked dinner. His dinner consisted of a flatbread and fish soup made with a freshly caught fish. Have a bowl and try our fish, the elder brother said, smiling, as he had his servants bring Frederick a bowl of white fish soup. It's not that I won't give you a big bite of the meat, but this fish has too many tiny bones. You need to break the meat up when you cook the soup, and filter out the bones when you drink it. Frederick thanked him and took a sip. It was sour, fragrant, and delicious, quite good. Just then, the float on the river surface moved slightly. He drank the soup quietly, not lifting his fishing line. The elder brother beside him nodded, thinking that this man was knowledgeable. The fish was testing the bait, but hadn't taken it yet. If he lifted the rod now, it would have escaped. Plop! A carriage passed by on the stone bridge not far from Frederick's side. Someone in the carriage suddenly threw some garbage into the water, startling the fish. The elder brother said, I knew that was a bad spot. Frederick shook his head helplessly, changed the bait, and cast his line again. But this time, the float didn't budge for a long time. The old man nearby hooked up 2 fish and had his servant grill them, giving one to Frederick. This time, the fish resembled a large pancake, its scales intact, making it crispy when grilled. Meanwhile, the servant lit another insect-repellent cigarette, and Frederick and the old man began chatting. The old man pointed across the river, about 100 meters away, and said, There's been a lot more fishing by the bridge on the other side lately, but they're all beginners. They pull up their lines the moment the fish try to catch them, leaving nothing. Frederick said, You'll know after a few attempts. He was then frustrated because no fish took the bait, even after changing bait several times. This time, he switched to a lively earthworm. Just as he had set the hook, the sound of horse hooves echoed from behind. Frederick ignored what was happening behind him. The float moved slightly in the moonlight, indicating a fish was testing the bait. A carriage pulled by 2 horses raced onto the stone bridge, making a noise. Fortunately, he hadn't thrown anything, and the fish continued to test the bait. Boom! A violent explosion erupted from the far side of the stone bridge. Fire shot up into the sky, and a moment later, countless rocks rained down, splashing the water across the surface. A fist-sized stone landed next to Frederick's float, and the next moment, it was still. Frederick stared at the float in amazement, then glanced across the river. He could smell the stench of gunpowder in the air. One of the stone bridge's piers had been blown apart, and the bridge deck had fallen into the water, rendering it impassable for a long time. Then, a group of men came running from upstream, weapons in hand, their heads wrapped in bandanas, leaving only their eyes visible. They were clearly not good people. The leader spotted Frederick and the fisherman, pointed at them, and shouted something. Immediately, several men rushed over with machetes. Local swear word, the fisherman jumped up at the sound of the voices. It's the Ghazi dog. He grabbed his saber and charged. The landlords here also needed to fight alongside their lords. Not only did the elder brother quickly entangle those men, but his servants could also help by striking them with clubs. Frederick frowned. The Ghazi Empire and the Kingdom of Kush were currently gathering strength before the next war. The bridge bombing was definitely done by the Ghazi Empire, and there was probably some conspiracy behind it. He naturally wouldn't stand idly by when his allies were in trouble, so he immediately joined the fray. Frederick first freed the elder brother, letting him cover him, and then charged into the crowd. The Ghazi Empire's men were quite skilled, including several magicians. The fireballs and ground spikes they launched blocked Frederick's attack. The elder brother behind him roared, bypassed them, and, despite the bloody wounds he received, rushed towards the magicians. The magician quickly stepped back to allow his companions to defend themselves, but the elder brother suddenly rushed forward. Several men, swords drawn, rushed forward, ready to strike from behind, but the servant leaped forward, using his body to buy his master a moment. The elder brother, still a step away from the magicians, suddenly drew a revolver from his bosom and fired, practically pointing it at the enemy's skull. Frederick was entangled. Several of his opponents were masters of combined attacks, their attack and defense perfectly coordinated. Caught off guard, he could only retreat and defend, unable to gain any advantage. He thought these men might be ambushing him in the reeds at the bridgehead. If the Kushites' attention were distracted by the broken bridge when they arrived, they could seize the opportunity to break out and potentially achieve significant results. By then, the group had surrounded him and was about to attack from behind when a flash of lightning engulfed the surrounding area. The Ghazi Empire's men, caught off guard by his magic, were paralyzed by the shockwaves. Frederick seized the opportunity and struck down the combined attack specialists. At that moment, another burst of hurried horse hooves echoed. The arrivals included not only the cavalry from the Port of Bird Army, but also the Royal Unicorn Cavalry guarding Queen Simi. Seeing this, the elder brother shouted a few times, and they quickly joined the battle, quickly resolving it. Frederick wondered if the carriage that had passed before the explosion must have contained something valuable. The enemy, anticipating pursuit, had sent this group in ambush. One of the Port of Bird cavalry recognized Frederick and recounted the recent events in the city. What? Frederick was startled. The prince was abducted. The Ghazi Empire had sent troops to abduct the Prince of Kush. There must be some conspiracy behind this. Putting aside the relationship between the two regimes, even in terms of personal ties, Madame Sophie had, years ago, placed her daughter, Susan, in Frederick's care. Everyone understood the significance of this move. This relationship was inevitable. Now that his nephew had been captured, Frederick naturally couldn't remain indifferent. The pursuers were scrambling for wood to repair the broken bridge, and many people were crowded on it. Frederick glanced at another magician in the crowd who had heard him boast before, and immediately shook his head. This guy claimed to be proficient in earth magic, but he hadn't taken the initiative to use magic to clear a passage through the broken bridge, at least to allow a few scouts to pass through. Frederick went to the water's edge to pack his luggage. He attached a spearhead to his fishing rod, pulled out a set of silver scale breastplates from his luggage and put them on. He took all his weapons, including his shield, and took his water bottle and first aid kit. He entrusted the rest of his luggage to the fisherman for safekeeping. "Are you going to chase them?" The fisherman was startled. He was bandaging a wound, and the strain had caused the bleeding to reemerge. Frederick nodded and said, "Yes, if we're too late, they'll have cleared their tracks and it'll be hard to find them. Please keep my luggage for me." He then reached the river's edge. A 3-meter diameter lily pad appeared in the water. He jumped on it, and a clover appeared behind him. As the clover spun, the lily pad sailed towards the other side of the river. Chapter 281 Magnet. The moonlight was bustling with activity, countless insects performing a nighttime symphony. Across the river, a lightning strike had caused a massive fire during the hottest days of last summer. Strong winds fanned the flames, leaving only a few charred tree trunks standing or lying in the dense forest. Now, dense shrubs half a man's height and saplings as tall as a building stood alone. A well-trodden road ran through it, revealing fresh horse hoof prints and wheel tracks. Frederick raced through the night, concentrating on observing any movement. This place was perfect for an ambush. The Ghazi Empire couldn't help but ambush his pursuers. He exerted all his strength, just in case. In the bushes, over 20 crossbow bolts pointed toward the road. The arrowheads and other metal parts of the crossbows were completely blackened, reflecting no light in the moonlight, making them invisible even from a few meters away. Suddenly, Frederick heard the snap of bowstrings and the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground, less than 30 meters away. He simply ducked to avoid the arrows, then threw a doomshroom in the direction of the sound, leaving the explosion scene without a backward glance. The crossbow mechanisms were mounted on roadside racks, controlled by pulleys, ropes, weights, and racks holding the weights. The operators, hidden somewhere, would pull the ropes to bring the racks down, halting the pursuers and stalling them. Similar ambushes had occurred several times along the way, and Frederick wasted no time, simply making the mechanisms useless. This enemy arrangement only strengthened his resolve to rescue Prince Emir. He wouldn't have gone to such great lengths unless there was a larger conspiracy. Perhaps the detonation of the doomshrooms alerted those ahead, as 5 cavalrymen appeared before Frederick shortly thereafter. They formed 2 lines, 3 in front and 2 in the back, each armed with a lance, sword, round shield, and bow and arrow. The 3 in front held lances, while the 2 in the back, armed with round shields and swords, were responsible for close combat. Seeing Frederick alone, the cavalrymen deployed immediately, pressing forward with lances while those with swords and shields switched to bows and arrows to flank him. Frederick didn't give them a chance to fully deploy. He charged head-on, suddenly drawing his throwing knives from his belt and hurling them at their unarmored thighs and other areas. The blades of these knives had a hollowed-out spot, inlaid with a match-head-sized, hollow, spongy metal, filled with poison. The 5 cavalrymen were unprepared for Frederick's ability to hurl them from such a distance, and caught off guard. They were awestruck. A sharp stinging pain extinguished their senses, and 2 breaths later, respiratory paralysis set in. Frederick retracted his knives and stabbed them again. He chose a horse, sheathed his bows and arrows, and rode in pursuit. Meanwhile, dozens of kilometers to the east, 20,000 troops and 50,000 civilians were moving into their newly constructed camp under cover of night. These troops, previously scattered across dozens of camps in the rear, had quickly rushed to their designated location upon receiving the order, arriving almost simultaneously. In the largest tent in the center of the camp, a man who had met Frederick several times before was respectfully reporting the current situation. Will reported to Fatih, the emperor of the Ghazi Empire, who was munching on a plate of happy water chicken wings. "Your Majesty, we've received a signal from the front that we have taken Prince Emir out of the port of Bessa, and the escort has already departed." Fatih placed the chicken wing bone on a golden plate and said calmly, "Whether we can draw the main force of the Kush kingdom here and provide an opportunity for the attack from the south depends on you this time. If this operation is done well, your guards will wash away the shame of their defeat at the hands of Duke Wesson." Will and the other guards commanders in the tent immediately knelt on one knee. Will declared loudly, "The guards will live up to your Majesty's trust this time." Fatih simply nodded, picked up another happy water chicken wing and began to eat. As he ate, he said, "The success of this battle depends on how long you can hold the enemy's main force here and how much time you can buy for the Southern Legion. Negotiate, hold on, attack, it's up to you to choose. I only care about the result." Then he said to someone standing behind him, "Hakan, you stay here and help the guards." Hakan, who had spent years in Constantinople spying on Phocas, immediately bowed to Fatih and accepted his orders, fully understanding the emperor's reason for keeping him there. He had been present when the Janissaries were annihilated in a flood, bearing joint responsibility. However, as the god of law, no one dared to speak against him. But Fatih was different. He was the emperor, commanding more than one strategic deterrent, capable of making Hakan's life uncomfortable within the rules. The Janissaries were determined to redeem themselves from this humiliation, and Hakan sought an opportunity to gain some points in the internal competition. "Oh, right," Fatih suddenly remembered. "Have you found a wet nurse?" Will quickly replied, "Your Majesty, we have arranged for several slave girls to care for Emir and ensure he survives the war." Fatih, realizing he didn't understand, asked irritably, "Do they have milk?" Will and the Janissaries looked at each other, all silent. Fatih pointed at the group with a chicken bone in annoyance and said, "I say, you guys, who doesn't have several children, how dare you forget such a thing? Oh, do you want a 1-year-old child to drink and eat meat like you do? If Emir starves to death, the kingdom of Kush will be without worries. I wonder how long you can survive if that woman Sufi goes crazy." At this time, a general immediately stepped forward to report to the emperor, "Your Majesty, I brought a lot of condensed milk this time. You can use it to feed Emir." Fatih asked him, "What is that?" The general immediately replied, "It was sold to me by a smuggler. He said that it was dehydrated milk with some sugar." It has the consistency of honey. It can be added to tea, spread on bread, and dipped in fruit. It can be drunk like milk when dissolved in water. I heard that the merchant said it was one of the military rations of the Wesson State Army. He had a lot of trouble to get a batch and sold it to me. Fata said to him, "Give me some when I leave tomorrow." Will also said quickly, "There are milk-producing sheep in the sheepfold. We can collect their milk. Where there are people, there are also rivers and lakes." Will saw someone getting ahead, and he couldn't let himself be left behind. Fata ignored such trivial matters. After wiping his hands with a cotton handkerchief, he stood up and said, "This battle is related to whether we can seize the Sun River estuary. Can you attract the main force of the Kush kingdom here like a magnet? This is the key to this battle. I promise you, after victory, the guards will have the right to choose the land first." Chapter 282 Breaking Through Two Formations. The generals of the Imperial Guard from the Ghazi Empire camp left the Emperor's tent. Fata sat alone on the carpet, his chin resting on a low table, quietly pondering something. Hakan sat on a mat not far away. His most important task now was to protect the Emperor. Fata suddenly asked, "Hakan, who do you think is right, the musket or the sword?" Hakan was momentarily perplexed and didn't respond for a long time. Ever since the introduction of gunpowder in the army, a conflict had arisen between the musket faction, comprised mainly of the rising nobility, who advocated the use of new weapons, and the sword faction, comprised mainly of the traditional nobility. The musket faction believed that muskets and artillery using gunpowder were easier to train, more powerful, and could kill enemies at long range without the risk of close combat, making them suitable for replacing infantry. The sword faction, on the other hand, argued that ancestral laws always held merit. Gunpowder was slow to reload, vulnerable to rain and even strong winds, and useless without gunpowder, making it unsuitable for the military and only suitable for hunting. During his lifetime, the late emperor supported the musketeers for political reasons, leading the Imperial Guard to form a musketeer corps. This corps, intending to march to Constantinople for a real battle, was unexpectedly annihilated by a flood, even infuriating the late emperor to death. A complex political struggle ensued, and Hakan carefully avoided the situation, staying as far away as possible. Seeing that Hakan did not answer, Fata changed the subject. "Do you think muskets have a future?" If it was a technical question, Hakan could still answer, "We still know too little about guns. We only have some weapons bought from the market and seized from the Kingdom of Kush. They are very different from what the Wesson Army uses. Although the Wesson Army's air guns do not use gunpowder, they also use expanding gas to propel the projectiles to fly. The principle is the same as our muskets." At that time, the guards and the Wesson Army fought a battle. That day I asked some people who participated in the battle and found that we were not as good as the other side in the rate of fire of the guns. That night Richardal was holding a very strange gun with many barrels. I think it was to increase the rate of fire. It can be seen that in the eyes of the Wesson Army, the development direction of guns and cannons is to increase the speed of shooting and fire more projectiles in a shorter time. In my personal opinion, muskets and cannons can replace bows and crossbows and catapults. Fata did not express his opinion immediately after listening. As an emperor, a few words would be overinterpreted by others, especially such a major issue involving the struggle between the two factions. He asked Hakan again, "Do you think we can produce guns like the ones used by the Wesson Army? After all, gunpowder is afraid of water, which is a problem." Hakan answered with some pride, "I have seen the jet tanks of Wesson State air guns. Optimizing the magic circle to increase power is not a problem. I am good at this." But he became helpless the next moment. But the scary thing about Wesson State's air guns is that every part of it is exactly the same. If there are 10 air guns with different faults, 9 good guns can be assembled with good parts in the time it takes to eat a meal. Instead of waiting for craftsmen to make new parts one by one, and the jet tank, although the magic circle on it is not perfect, I don't know how they made it so cheaply. If we want to make air guns ourselves and equip the army on a large scale, it will be very expensive. It is better to find a way to buy it from them. Fata asked Hakan in surprise, "Is the cost difference so big?" "Yes," Hakan replied, "when I was in Constantburg, I asked many businessmen in Wesson State. There are many magicians working in the factories there, and the products they produce are fast and good." Fata sat there in silence for a long time before he said, "After this battle, come with me to Wesson." Hakan shuddered and said hastily, "Your Majesty, this is impossible." An imperial trip was no small matter. Furthermore, it sounded like he was going incognito. and to such a distant destination, raising the possibility of both personal safety and domestic politics. If anything went wrong, Håkon felt he would be the scapegoat, and might even have to flee. But Fata made no effort to consult Håkon, instead issuing orders. "What time is it?" Fata asked. "When will Emir arrive?" By then, the carriage carrying Prince Emir had come into Frederick's sight, and the faint sound of a child's cries could be heard. But then the first reinforcements from the Ghazi Empire arrived, a vast, dark mass in the moonlight, numbering 200 or 300 men. Among them were 3 or 5 knights wearing cuirass and mail, a dozen or so cavalrymen in mail only, and the remainder infantry and archers armed with spears. The group had been planning to ambush nearby. Upon hearing from the carriage that there was only one pursuer, the leading officer and his mounted men charged forward, with double-armored knights in the center and the other cavalrymen flanking. Frederick, spotting the commander, clamped his legs against the horse's belly. A surge of electricity coursed through its body, transforming its timid steed into a lively one, accelerating its speed. Before the enemy cavalry could deploy, Frederick had already reached them, his spear-tipped fishing rod transformed into a lance, and before the enemy could react, he thrust a single lance into their throats. Having struck home, he immediately turned his lance and stabbed a nearby knight with the same blow. 2 knights charged, shouting and brandishing sabers. Frederick, lance in one hand and sword in the other, quickly stabbed one and decapitated the other. He charged past the enemy cavalry, leaving several more dead, and then charged toward the infantry. Before the infantry could even form their ranks, seeing their lords and knights being easily slaughtered like chickens, their morale plummeted, and they lost all courage to fight. Frederick only had to hack and slash, and the enemy fled in all directions. He glanced at the officer's horse, a warhorse of unicorn blood, worth at least a few hundred florins in the north, so he traded horses and collected some spare weapons. However, the first-rate steed initially disliked its new owner, but after 2 slaps on the head, it docilely obeyed. Seeing the carriage about to disappear in the moonlight, Frederick immediately gave chase. After a while, as they drew closer, a group of heavy infantry armed with extra-long lances appeared ahead. Hearing the shouts of the carriage, they formed their ranks. The leading officer, with a dozen cavalrymen, circled through the brush and charged from the flank. The brush slowed the horse's speed, so Frederick unsheathed his bow and arrows, aiming at the man whose armor shone brightest. The first arrow was deflected by an invisible shield half a meter away from the opponent's body. The second arrow was attached to a small fireball, glowing red, like a fire meteor in the dark night. The opponent, seizing the opportunity, stretched out his lance and aimed at the arrow shaft, ready to shoot it down. Unexpectedly, the seemingly ordinary enchanted fireball on the arrowhead suddenly exploded, and the sky and the earth seemed to be filled with flames. The sticky fire elemental flames poured out in all directions like water, and in a short time, more than a dozen cavalrymen, including their horses, were turned into torches. The team of heavy infantry with super long spears blocking the road panicked, and then an arrow with 2 light rings flew over their heads. The 2 light rings collided and a violent explosion occurred. The heavy infantry were instantly blown to pieces, and many people fainted. Frederick spurred his horse forward, stepping on the people on the ground and rushing forward. Chapter 283, Alone Against the Heroes. Shoot. Shoot. Countless arrows, reflecting the moonlight like a falling starry sky, hurled themselves at the galloping man and horse. Countless fireballs illuminated the night sky, closely following the arrows. The sound of arrows piercing the ground was instantly drowned out by the explosion of the fireballs. Flames shot up into the sky in front of the nearly 1,000-man army. The knights on both wings tightened their reins, their eyes fixed on the man and horse. A golden pumpkin enveloped Frederick, unharmed. Several corn cannons appeared before him, sending van-sized golden corn cobs flying almost horizontally towards the infantry formation ahead. The guards' magicians quickly applied magical shields to the infantry, and only the first 2 rows suffered casualties after their shields were breached. However, the tremendous explosions and blinding light left many dizzy and temporarily blinded. Frederick stopped using magic. He had fought countless interceptions and was exhausted. The enemy's brightly lit camp lay in the distance. He took advantage of the enemy mages' weakened mental state after their shields were destroyed to charge into the enemy lines. After a flurry of attacks, he pierced the enemy lines and headed straight for the mages. That night, he unleashed every elemental puppet and Plants vs. Zombies spell Psyche had given him. The assassin and barbarian elemental puppets attacked the archers, while he, along with the Dark Ranger and the scythe-wielding Little Red Riding Hood, harvested the mages' lives. As the enemy cavalry approached from either flank, Frederick had already slipped away, leaving a trail of corpses and potato mines. The pursuing cavalry were inexplicably blown to pieces, temporarily slowing their pace. By then, the carriage carrying Emir was nearing the camp, and Frederick caught up within 500 meters of the main gate. Suddenly, a mass of dark green, entwined weeds emerged from the ground, entangling both rider and rider. Several tentacles quickly extended into the carriage, enveloping Emir. The woman holding Emir was a middle-aged woman who had been lurking in the Kush kingdom for 30 years. Initially, she didn't want to let go, but the next moment, her hands were broken by the tentacles. Frederick stood still, his left-handed sword, his right-handed spear, and his entire body stained red with blood. The steel shield slung across his back was dented. Before him, countless guardsmen burst through the camp gates and formed up, their broken formations appearing behind him. Wrapped in tangled weeds, Emir ran to Frederick's side and fastened himself to the back of his saddle. Frederick didn't turn away. His horse was exhausted and would die of exhaustion if he ran any longer. He needed to intimidate the enemy, deter them from pursuing him. Inside the camp, Fatih had awakened, donning his armor. He had heard that someone had single-handedly defeated Wheel's reinforcements and had stopped a carriage in front of the camp to rescue Emir, and now he was in high spirits. When did the kingdom of Kush have such a brave warrior? He asked Wheel with interest. We should accept such a man. Money, women, land, knowledge, whatever he wants, we should give him. Hakan, standing by, immediately said, Your Majesty, I'll capture him right away. Wheel, not realizing he was a step too late, hurriedly said, Don't bother, Your Excellency Hakan. I'll present him to Your Majesty. This was a chance to show his face before the Emperor, and no one would miss it. Without waiting for Fatih's approval, Wheel turned and headed out of the camp. Just then, a thunderous voice rang out from outside, Friedrich von Wesson is here. Who dares to step forward and fight? Frederick roared, intent on capturing the leader first. A general would embolden his soldiers. If they could eliminate the enemy's commander, the common soldiers and mid-level officers would fall without a fight. He didn't realize his name was so popular in the Ghazi Empire that it could silence a child's night cry. He just noticed that the opposing army had suddenly quieted down, and those who had been trying to encircle him retreated to the sides. Fatih frowned, muttering to himself, Why is he here? Wheel didn't leave, but immediately said to the Emperor, Your Majesty, judging by the voice, this man is Charles Smith of Wanjing City. Fatih suddenly realized, so that's why. No wonder. Then his eyes focused. Issue an order. Whoever captures Duke Wesson will receive a reward of 10,000 gold coins. The Emperor's order quickly spread to the front. Just then, a cavalry unit burst out of the camp gate, bypassing the army formation and charging towards Frederick. Leading them were 5 knights, and Frederick recognized the banner behind them. It belonged to the Zane family, lords of Wanjing City. The Zane family, with its powerful control of the seaport, had volunteered to escort His Majesty Fatih to the city. They weren't part of the Imperial Guard and hadn't initially dispatched troops. But having heard of the bounty outside the Emperor's tent, they immediately came out to claim the head. Fatih simply smiled upon hearing this. He wanted results. Whoever was responsible was irrelevant. Soon, someone arrived with the news, Your Majesty, Mahdi, the eldest son of the Zane family, has been stabbed to death by Duke Wesson. Fatih nodded expressionlessly. He had met Mahdi before in Wanjing City. Years ago, he had led over a dozen cavalrymen to defeat a 1,000-man Kush army. His strength was formidable, yet he was unexpectedly killed by a single spear from Duke Wesson. Just as Fatih was assessing Frederick's strength, another report arrived, Your Majesty, the Zane family's second son, Nur, the third son, Samir, and the fourth son, Yon, have avenged their brother. Nur was beheaded, Yon was shot dead with an arrow, and Samir was captured by Duke Wesson and thrown to death from his horse. Fatih's expression grew solemn. The other 3 Zane sons were as brave as their eldest brother, yet they had all been killed so easily by Frederick. He immediately headed outside the tent to see if his bravery was truly as valiant as he had been. Then another report arrived, Your Majesty, Count Zane, avenging his son, has also been stabbed to death by Count Wesson. Outside the camp, Frederick glanced at the bodies on the ground. Unconsciously, he dunked Count Zane's unicorn and slapped it twice to tame it. Who else? Everyone on the other side looked at each other. no one daring to move. Then someone shouted, "Don't be so arrogant, infidel. I, Marduk of Mitanni, will kill you." Frederick had no idea where Mitanni was. He saw a man and a horse charging out from the opposite side. Within a few steps, both were shrouded in flaming armor, looking incredibly imposing. Marduk wielded an extremely long saber, nearly 150 centimeters long, now coated in searing flames. As he approached Frederick, he leaped his horse and swung his saber simultaneously, using the combined force of man and horse to cut Frederick in two. Frederick calculated the enemy's position. Just as Marduk reached his highest point, he suddenly rose from his unicorn, thrust forward, and stabbed his spear with lightning speed into the enemy's abdomen. Marduk, unprepared for such a nobleman's life-for-life tactics, hesitated for a moment before bringing his saber down upon the spear. Instead of the spear shattering as Marduk had anticipated, his saber was deflected, and a sharp pain shot through his abdomen. Frederick's fishing rod and spearhead, both crafted from elemental metal, easily pierced the enemy's flame armor, breastplate, and chain mail. In the blink of an eye, Frederick lifted Marduk high from his horse and flung him aside. The flames on Marduk's body remained, but this time they radiated from within. "Anything else?" Frederick asked again. Fatty had already arrived at the battlefront, squinting his eyes as he surveyed Frederick. Will followed, but the sight of the bodies on the ground gave him pause. Frederick calmly breathed in as deeply as he could, having just exhausted himself. Seeing this, Håkon soared into the air, arriving 100 meters from Frederick. He spoke condescendingly, "Håkon, the wind is here, Duke Wesson, surrender." Frederick was speechless. He hadn't expected a magic god to stand before him. This presented a difficult situation. Håkon drew closer, and Frederick could sense his domain enveloping him. A gust of wind blew around him, nearly shredding his clothes. Seeing Frederick showed no sign of surrender, Håkon played another card. He dared not kill Frederick. Not only would Richardal cause trouble, but summoning Psyche would be a sure death. His body began to grow taller and stronger, with two horns sprouting from either side of his head. Frederick had seen Carlos perform similar magic in Wanjing City, where her physical strength would be exponentially enhanced. He paid no heed to the prohibitions against attacking during transformation. As Håkon was halfway through, 3 steel spikes appeared in his hands, and a ring of lightning formed before him. Håkon, perceiving everything within his own realm, dismissed the lightning rings as Frederick's defensive measures. In a battle with the god of magic, every second counted. Frederick didn't have time to unleash his electromagnetic cannon at full power, fearing interruption. He unleashed the steel spikes before reaching full power. The 3 spikes darted at Håkon, who had just transformed, at twice the speed of sound. The cavity in his tail contained only 2 pairs of light elemental collision rings. Håkon, having recently clad himself in a majestic blue wind elemental armor, saw the incoming spikes, believing them to be arrows and the light elemental rings at his tail to be mere magical attacks. He swung his wind elemental armor-covered fist at the spikes. Just as his fist deflected the spikes, Håkon's instincts told him of danger, and he quickly retreated. But it was too late. The unprecedentedly violent explosion unleashed a wave of energy that instantly snarled the surrounding magical elements, throwing them out of control. Even his domain was momentarily shaken. The lightning ring before Frederick persisted. He drew Count Zane's saber, hanging from his saddle, and, using electromagnetic acceleration, flung it at Håkon. Håkon, unaware of the grayish annihilation element etched on the saber, instinctively blocked it with his hand. Unexpectedly, the saber sliced through his wind armor. The battle ended in the blink of an eye. Håkon picked up his arm and retreated, hoping to catch up while it was still fresh, but his strength would be greatly reduced for a while. Frederick, now too exhausted to speak, forced himself to turn the unicorn back toward the port of Berserk. Fatty's face darkened. He repeatedly considered ordering an attack, but he was unsure of Frederick's remaining fighting strength, fearing he might still have the strength to kill him. The entire battlefield was unusually strange. No one dared to step forward, allowing Frederick to take a mere away and eventually disappear into the night. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Closure Plan. A strange ceiling, When Frederick opened his eyes, he saw a sun painted in the center of the ceiling. Flowers and plants lined the walls, and beautiful birds and butterflies fluttered in the space between. He recognized several of the birds, parrots with vibrant feathers. They were among the most beloved animals at the Wessenland Zoo, and their merchandise was a hot commodity. Of course, the zoo's most popular bird was Dawn, so Frederick naturally didn't send it there. But one day, it happened to wander there and found many children offering them food. From then on, it made a regular visit there. "Are you awake?" a familiar voice called from the side. Frederick turned around, curled his lips, and said, "I thought it was a beautiful maid serving me. You don't have any intentions towards me, do you?" Hayreddin rolled her eyes and said, "I have enough women to fill 2 ships. The Queen Mother is worried about an assassination attempt on you, so she's asked me to stay here." Frederick thought it was true. Hayreddin was the only Kush expert he knew, so he could avoid any communication problems. He struggled to sit up and found his clothes had been changed and probably washed. "How long have I slept?" he asked. "I'm hungry." Hayreddin rang the bell for a servant to bring some food, then said, 5 days. "You fainted the night after bringing His Highness the Emir back." His Majesty Yuan and the Queen Mother received the news immediately by telegram and immediately flew from Fustat with the Royal Air Cavalry. They summoned me to blockade the sea. The servants quickly brought the food and set a small table in front of Frederick. It was a dish of boiled beans. Broad beans were boiled in water until the shells fell off, then cooked with olive oil, salt, an unknown seasoning, and small, finger-sized meatballs. It tasted quite good. There was also a glass of tomato juice. The color red is revered in the Flame Church here, and tomatoes are called cherry tomatoes here. While Frederick was eating, Hayreddin continued to tell him about the current situation. "The situation is not good now. In addition to a royal guard and other troops deployed in the east, the Ghazi Empire also deployed 200,000 troops in the south. We only found out this morning that their Griffin regiment is over there. It seems that is the main force. Now we have to fight a war, but there is no consensus on how to fight those fools on the ground. We have fewer soldiers than the Ghazi Empire. If we divide our troops, we can't defeat anyone. We can only choose between devouring their royal guards and defending the south." Frederick heard something and asked, "You don't have a good relationship with the army on the ground?" Hayreddin nodded and didn't say much. He couldn't say that he had already controlled the naval power of the Kush kingdom. If he colluded with the nobles on the ground, he might die inexplicably one day. Frederick ate for a while, thought for a while, then said, "It is very strange that the enemy stole His Highness Emir. This trick will not work in a head-on battle. The king and queen are still young. Taking him as a hostage and killing him will only make them give birth to another one, so, a living emir is more useful than a dead one. They will use this to threaten negotiations. What do you think your reaction will be then?" Hayreddin said without hesitation, "It must be to mobilize the army, force them to lower the conditions, and try to send people to rescue them." Then he began to think, and said slowly, "Well, this way the army in the south will be smaller and will not be able to stop the attack of the main force of the opposite side." "You mean, those guards are just bait?" "It seems so. The navy of the Ghazi Empire was severely damaged by you. If those guards want to surround the port of Bisay, they can't take it down with my support. If a war breaks out, the idiots on the ground can ignore the north and concentrate on dealing with the south. The people of the Ghazi Empire are not stupid. They must understand this. That's why they kidnapped His Highness Emir and transferred our troops to the north to create opportunities in the south." Frederick nodded. It was easy to talk to smart people. Hayreddin asked him curiously, "If you were in command, how would you fight?" Frederick thought about it, smiled slightly, and said innocently, Didn't you tell me just now? Just gather all your flying things, equip them with explosives, first blow up the griffins in the south on the ground to ensure the safety of the sky, then blow up and burn all the food in their barracks, and then kill their food transport teams from the sky to make them lose their offensive capability. Now the morale of the guards has plummeted, and you can free up your hands to destroy their food, which will also prevent them from attacking. Then you use boats to carry the idiots on the ground to the east and directly close the door to the Luna Peninsula." Hayreddin took a breath of cool air from the air conditioner. Everyone else was thinking about how to fight on the front line, but Frederick was actually plotting to take over the Luna Peninsula, which covers an area of nearly 60,000 square kilometers. No wonder he made such a big name at such a young age. But after careful consideration, he realized the plan was highly feasible. The Ghazi Empire's naval forces were temporarily underdeveloped, allowing them to easily transport some of their main army forces to the east of the Luna Peninsula. Simply seizing a few key transportation routes would close the gap. Everyone had their own agenda. Hayridin reflected that his navy's contributions were undeniable. He could easily make those idiots on the ground swim across. Therefore, it was best for him to publicly propose the plan, avoiding the potential opposition from those who might object simply because it was proposed by a foreigner. He could simply privately share the true situation with the Queen Mother and the King. However, another crucial point of this plan was whether the Air Force could, as Frederick had planned, destroy the enemy's air force and food supply from the outset, pinning them down. Even if they could return to support the east of the Luna Peninsula, they would still be starving. If they couldn't immediately shock the enemy, they would rush headlong into the Kush Kingdom, disregarding their retreat, perhaps gaining a respite through war and sustenance. That would be a serious problem. In the end, Hayridin gave up. Those flying creatures were even more annoying than the idiots on the ground. Hayridin rose from his chair and saluted Frederick. "Thank you very much." They had been dealing with each other for so long, there was no need for further conversation. Hayridin knew without hesitation what Frederick would ask him to do, simply to help his woman at sea and his business. Frederick simply smiled. He knew Hayridin well. Men at sea were known for their integrity. A captain who broke his word would have been thrown overboard long ago. After lunch, Frederick had recovered considerably after a substantial meal. Hayridin no longer needed to watch over him, and he attended the daily, contentious Imperial Council meetings. Chapter 285 Training. On a scorching summer day, a glass of ice-cold Libby refreshed him, both physically and mentally. Psyche was in charge of the beverage factory's research and development, and Frederick drank whatever she invented. He hadn't expected Libby to be available, and it was his first time in Kush. Frederick gulped down the entire bottle and said to the worker next to him, "Okay, let's start assembling the fan." He was in the part shop behind the Wesson Steam Tractor 4S shop in the port of Burse. There was a steam-powered lathe and plenty of parts, plenty to work with. Just then, a distinguished guest arrived. Madame Sophie, dressed in a light blue gown, entered. Upon seeing Frederick, she said, "I should have expected you to be here. It would have made it easier to find you." No need to greet. Several Kush workers were in the shop, about to greet the Queen Mother, but were stopped. Madame Sophie asked her staff to wait outside and went inside. Frederick, unfazed, said with a smile, "While you're bickering endlessly, I'm going to go out for a stroll." Hayridin's battle plan stirred up a storm, with some for and many against. The young king supported it in his heart, but he didn't readily express his opinion. The argument lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Frederick, unwilling to interfere with their decision-making, went out to play. "You guys keep going, don't worry about me." Madame Sophie stood by, watching the fun. "Isn't the girl I arranged for you pretty enough? You've come all this way to such a hot place," Frederick, assembling the machine with a steam engine technician from Wesson, said. "I've noticed that many people can't afford air conditioners, so we've decided to produce a cheap air conditioner." "Many people can afford it," Madame Sophie said with some resignation. "You came all this way just for this? Ewan and Zimmy wanted to thank you, but you disappeared. We sent people to the river to ask the fishermen, but they couldn't find you either." Frederick smiled and said, "I'm here for a trip. I wanted to see you quietly before I leave." To avoid public notice, Madame Sophie was speechless. After a moment, she said, "Come home for dinner tonight." "Just the family, no one else," Frederick agreed. Madame Sophie didn't leave, but watched him fiddling with the various parts. Frederick's plan was simple, to construct a Stirling engine-driven fan using the cylinders and other parts of a low-horsepower steam engine. A Stirling engine is an external combustion engine with an external heat source. It can be powered by an alcohol lamp, charcoal, or even lard, and has a high speed. However, its drawbacks are significant: low power, low efficiency, large size, and even carbon deposits when burning fuel. Using it to power a vehicle was out of the question for now, but it could certainly be used to generate air from the fan blades. The parts were already in place, and Frederick and his technicians quickly assembled the machine and mounted it on an iron frame. The iron bars of the frame were formed and welded by Frederick himself, making them fit perfectly. Frederick personally carved the fan blades from a lightweight local wood, and the outer cover was simply bent rattan. Frederick had an iron cup drilled in the bottom, filled with wood, and lit to serve as a heat source. After placing it under the hot cylinder, the fan blade soon began to spin rapidly. Madame Sophie had been watching, and when the fan started to turn, she stood in front. The wind blowing her robe and headscarf backwards. The wind is quite strong, she was a little surprised. It looks like it shouldn't be expensive. Frederick smiled and said, this fan is just a principal model. It is still a long way from being able to be mass-produced. I plan to build a factory here to produce this specifically. The profit distribution can be discussed. Mrs. Sophie was about to agree, but suddenly she thought of something and said to him, you can talk to Yuan about this now. He is the king. Frederick agreed and said to the technician next to him, let's try this machine here first. After a while, send the trial report, drawings and machine back to Ahmed. He will make arrangements. When the fan is put on the market, everyone who participates in the next 2 days will receive 50 units each. Then he pointed to the technician and said, Padrofan, you have contributed the most, with 100 units. The technician named Padrofan immediately replied very energetically, Principal, I will definitely do a good job of testing and personally hand over the report, drawings and machine to Professor Ahmed. Frederick nodded, then left with Mrs. Sophie. Madame Sophie prepared a family dinner to thank Frederick. Frederick, holding a mirror, sat on the carpet with Yuan and Zimi. In the middle sat a small, low table, set with a fruit platter and drinks. Amir and Frederick were very close, and they enjoyed themselves immensely. Madame Sophie went to the kitchen to prepare the meal herself, leaving the room for the young people. Yuan, not much older than Frederick, had dark hair tied in a spiral braid that hung down his back. His eyes were the same golden color as Madame Sophie's, but a darker shade. The young king looked a little haggard. After some pleasantries, he asked Frederick directly, how feasible is the plan you proposed through Hayreddin? Once he got down to business, Zimi immediately left Yuan's side and knelt behind him. Frederick understood his pressure. This was a gamble on the fate of his country. A win would allow him to reclaim tens of thousands of square kilometers of territory, while a loss would be disastrous. It's hard to say how successful this operation will be, Frederick said, teasing Amir. I don't know enough about the combat effectiveness, marching capabilities, logistical capabilities, or intelligence collection and analysis capabilities of both your armies to make any further judgment, but I can share some of my experiences in commanding operations. When planning a war, don't think first about how to win. Think first about what factors will lead to failure and whether these factors can be solved or prevented from being seized upon by the enemy. When making plans before a war, treat the enemy as the smartest person in the world, who can discover your flaws. Don't fool yourself into thinking they are fools. The plan must include a response plan in case of failure, so that you won't be caught off guard. A single person's brain can only think of so much. As the commander-in-chief, you need to tap into the ingenuity of everyone. If your subordinates have proven their ability and are trustworthy, then trust them and don't easily interfere with their specific operations. Your confidence and goals must be firm and not easily changed. Don't give up because of a small setback, otherwise your subordinates will be at a loss. Our most important role in war is to steer the course, choosing the final decision we deem most appropriate from a variety of suggestions. Yuan hesitated. He had initially expected Frederick, a veteran of so many battles, to offer some winning formula, but it was nothing but cliches. Seeing his thoughts, Frederick simply smiled and continued to playfully rub Amir's face. Young people always dream of secrets to achieve quick results, constantly searching for shortcuts and striving to surpass previous achievements. But some things only become clearer with age, like those cliches that endure precisely because they are useful. This understanding requires a few setbacks. Soon after, Madame Sophie and her servants arrived with the dishes. The main course was a large platter of roasted venison and offal, with a salt and pepper saucer in the center. The main course was quite interesting: rice soaked in water, mixed with spices, stuffed into hollowed-out tomato, and then steamed. The soup was based on goose, with herbs, fried garlic, and celery. Vegetables were prepared the way Frederick liked them: cut the leaves, blanch them in boiling water, and then remove them from the water. They were then tossed with olive oil, salt, and a little oyster sauce and soy sauce. The conversation between Frederick and Yuan had reached Madame Sophie's ears through the servants. After everyone started eating, she bluntly said to Yuan, "See, what I said to you, what Frederick said to you, and what Hayreddin and the others said to you were all basically the same. I really should have taken you out to sea, so you could experience firsthand in the storm what it means for everything in the world to follow its own laws and not be swayed by personal whims." She, too, had battled the wind and waves on the sea before, returning as a ruthless person who slaughtered her political enemies in a bloodbath. Her severity immediately intimidated Yuen. Madame Sophie continued, "You've read Susan's letters back to you quite a few times over the years, haven't you? I wonder if you've taken Frederick's words and actions to heart. If you keep using your I don't care what you think, I care what I think, and don't learn from Frederick's pragmatic approach, I won't be able to help you in the end." Not long ago, you thought that the Ghazi Empire's guards had just been defeated and the emperor had been replaced, so there wouldn't be any war in the near future to stabilize the country. Someone warned you that the new emperor would start a war to establish his authority. What did you say then? Now, there's an army of 300,000 right across the border, and you didn't even know when they started preparing to assemble. You only realized the army had reached the border after your son was kidnapped. No more talking. I'm getting angrier. Let's eat. The table suddenly fell silent, the only sound being the murmur of Sami feeding Amir rice porridge with mincemeat and vegetables. Frederick didn't know what to say. He already knew he had become the other people's child, that Madame Sophie had been scolding her son. Saying anything now might only irritate Yuen and backfire. He was also thinking that the fan factory issue wasn't a good time to discuss it right now, so he'd probably leave it for later, as it would take some time anyway. As for Yuen's reaction to his mother's scolding, Frederick couldn't predict it. However, he was also considering finding another way to fill his eggs in the south. Chapter 286 Traveling. As the sun rose near its zenith, Madame Sophie arrived at Frederick's room. Frederick's belongings were already packed, his backpack and sword placed by the bedside. He sat on the bed, a map, just over a meter long and half a meter wide, spread out before him, his expression unsettled. The map of the forest sea was remarkably detailed, showing not only the entire forest but also the various political powers along the northern inland sea and within the forest. Frederick realized how little the North knew about the forest sea. Previous maps lacked scale and were drawn in a cartoonish style, leading him to believe the forest sea was only 200 or 300 kilometers wide from north to south. He therefore sought a way to cross from south to north. A few years ago, the Kingdom of Kush began redrawing its northern map of the southern continent using longitude and latitude to scale. Current maps revealed that the forest sea stretched over 2,000 kilometers from north to south. Frederick was also surprised by the political power in this region. The Kingdom of Kush, with its advantageous water transport network via the Sun River and its tributaries, controlled a vast expanse of land east of the forest sea, making it the largest state in the region. To the west, dense forests hindered transportation, leaving many states situated in a narrow strip between the forest sea and the inland sea. Rivers flowing into the sea allowed them to control the territories along the river, with towns and villages built along the river banks. Deeper into the forest grew even denser, and the monsters were numerous and powerful, making safe passage only by water. Many of the forest's small rivers were neither wide nor deep enough for large fleets, making it impossible for coastal states to deploy large forces. Consequently, the forests teemed with independent, small states, some claiming to be kings even if they ruled over a small town of 1,000 or two. Frederick thought, "You never know how wonderful the world is until you come here." Madame Sophie approached his bedside and asked, "When are you leaving?" Frederick pointed to the map and replied, "Tomorrow. First, follow the Sun River south for a while, then follow it west into the forest sea. After a circuitous journey, we'll finally exit the Kingdom of Hafs and cross the sea to the island of Silj in the Kingdom of Sardinia." He didn't mention that he planned to work as a monster hunter for a while, a task assigned by Richardner. Madame Sophie wasn't interested in his travel plans. Instead, she asked, "Are you dissatisfied with the UN?" Frederick looked up at her in confusion, saying, "How could I possibly be dissatisfied?" Madame Sophie's expression appeared calm, but her gaze was sharp, as if she could see through people's minds. She said, "You haven't told Yuen about that fan factory we talked about the other day. He'd definitely agree if he'd told you. I can see you're disappointed with him and need to diversify your risks." Frederick hadn't expected her to be so perceptive. He'd have read his mind. "I just had a change of heart," Frederick said. "Your relationship with the Ghazi Empire is extremely poor. They're a potential major client, so I'm looking for a better location." Madame Sophie couldn't argue with this excuse and could only sigh. Frederick comforted her, "It's okay. At least he's a king who can handle his family business." Madame Sophie got the answer she wanted and left. Frederick simply shook his head and said nothing more. Hayradin's proposal was decisively rejected. Yi Wen ordered the bridges demolished, and after the battle began, the navy sailed upstream to prevent the Ghazi Empire's army from crossing several key rivers. No one favored this passive defense. Even Hayreddin, a veteran of naval warfare, could see that the land east of the river defenses was doomed to be lost. Early the next morning, Hayreddin arrived while Frederick was having breakfast. He had helped arrange the ship for the upcoming departure. Frederick was eating a fried pancake made from a mixture of pea puree and herbs when he saw Hayreddin's gloomy expression and asked, "What's wrong? Did something upset you?" Hayreddin sat down at the long table and, after the servants had all left, said, "I'm so pissed. Those idiots on Earth actually told me to send sailors to shore to shore to shore to shore." Frederick glanced at him in surprise and asked, "You didn't agree, did you?" Hayreddin replied, "Of course not. I had a quarrel with them. Anyone can see now that the small rivers to the east are no match for the Ghazi Empire's army. This battle will cost us at least 80 kilometers of land. Starting tomorrow, have the people from that area relocate and reclaim the wasteland in the delta." Frederick shook his head slightly. After taking 2 bites of pea and meatballs, he said, "How about this? Once the enemy's offensive momentum subsides, your ships can cut off their retreat and cut off their food supply." "That's the only way." Hayreddin nodded and said, "I was thinking the same thing. Could you get your people in Constantinople to sell me more weapons?" Frederick ate his breakfast quietly, thinking. When he finished, he said, "Selling weapons is no problem. If you need me, I can even send about 500 mercenaries to help you." Hayreddin said happily, "That's great. With a few hundred of you, plus my ships and men, I can do a lot. I could even capture a few ports." Frederick thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you hire more troops from Dragaces and take over the Luna Peninsula yourself?" Hayreddin's eyes suddenly became sharp, but he quickly shook his head. He had no appetite, and some of the biscuits would be too bloated. Frederick's willingness to sell weapons and send men was enough. He couldn't ask for too much. After breakfast, Frederick wrote a note to Hayreddin in code, asking him to take several letters to Constantinople, where they would be delivered to the garrison and sent back to Wesenborg. Soon after, Frederick arrived at the inland port west of Berzy harbor. He was startled when he saw the boat he was about to board. He turned to Hayreddin and asked, "How did this boat get here?" It was a small inland river boat, about 20 meters long and over 3 meters wide, with a single cabin, an awning on the roof, and a paddle wheel at the stern. This was a paddle wheel technology demonstration vessel built during the development of paddle wheel steamships. After the experiments were completed, it was sold. Frederick hadn't paid much attention to it at the time, but he never expected it to appear here. Crucially, the boat was originally powered by human power, with a group of people on board turning the paddle wheel by a chain, much like a bicycle. Hayreddin said proudly, "I bought it. Not long ago, someone installed a steam engine for the tractor. And I also have a steamboat. I'll lend you this boat. You can bring some goods if you like." Frederick laughed and asked, "If you want to bring goods, I'd like to trouble you to recommend some." Hayreddin immediately said, "Aren't you going to the forest? The most precious goods there are sold. Even if you don't sell it yourself, you can sell it at the market on the edge." Frederick spent a morning purchasing some salt and set off in the afternoon. Chapter 287, A Town by the Sea. "What kind of animal is that? A water buffalo? Are you kidding me? Do you have a woman?" Frederick had become acquainted with his captain over the past few days. A former pirate, he had become more brazen with his words. But Frederick was speechless when he looked at the animals basking in the sun after wallowing in the mud on the shore. Their snouts did resemble those of cows, but their bodies were like those of manatees, platypuses, 2 or 3 meters long, with smooth, tough-looking gray skin, short limbs, webbed feet, and short, broad tails that looked like they were good at paddling. A boat passed by on the opposite side of the river. It resembled the Wupang boats Lu Sun had used to attend community operas, except that 2 water buffaloes were harnessed to the bow, and a boatman steered a boat like a horse-drawn carriage, making it much faster than walking. Frederick could only sigh at the wonders of the world. Cages on that boat held palm-sized birds, their feathers vibrant and colorful, their voices distinct. The captain sighed upon seeing this. "Wow! That shipload of birds is enough to exchange for 10 ships loads of salt." Frederick said somewhat helplessly, "It's us who are driving up the price. The opening of the Wesson Zoo has boosted the animal trade. Now, no noble or merchant in Wesson would be embarrassed to invite guests home without a rare bird or two. This has led to several chicken farms in Wesson seizing the opportunity to raise birds, and the starting salary for graduates of Wesson University with a major in aviculture has doubled. The captain said to Frederick, "If I hadn't lost my leg, I'd be catching birds in the forest." As he spoke, the paddle steamer began to dock. This was the dock of a small, bustling town on the edge of the forest. The tax collector initially approached with a stern look, but the captain pulled up his sleeve to show him the shark tattoo on his arm, and the cargo was exempted from tax. Frederick asked curiously, "What's going on?" "Duty-free," the captain smiled and replied, "We're tax-free wherever the ship can reach." Frederick gave him a thumbs up. The captain had a lot of work to do. He directed the sailors to run around contacting warehouses and stalls, and to inquire about prices. Along the coast of Kush, sea salt is slightly cheaper than wheat of the same weight, fetching at least 5 times the price here. Fur is also quite cheap here, fetching 7 or 8 times as much if taken to the coast. So Frederick disembarked here, hoping to take some goods back with him. That evening, Frederick treated the captain and crew to a 2-meter-long roasted python at what was supposedly the town's finest restaurant. The men, impressed by the Duke of Wesson's ability, left him some imported weapons from Wesson before leaving the next day. The captain had helped Frederick find a half space on the town's commercial street to sell salt, next to a linen shop. The cloth merchant was quite talkative, and they sat down under the awning outside his shop to chat. "The best cloth in the forest is spider silk," the cloth seller said. "Don't be fooled by spiders' ugly appearance. Their silk, when scalded in hot water, becomes light, thin, and elastic. It's just hard to dye." He asked his wife to bring a roll of spider silk to Frederick. The snow-white cloth was very elastic and smooth. Just then, a group of people approached, led by a thin, middle-aged man wearing linen clothes with 7 beautiful feathers tucked into his chest. Behind him followed a dozen thin men pushing carts, wearing clothes and skirts made of rags, leaves, and slime bags. This man brought a roll of spider silk and, after some bargaining in his accented Kushite language, exchanged it for 20 rolls of linen. Seeing that Frederick had salt for sale, he gave most of the linen back to the cloth seller, who then gave the money to Frederick. He then went across the street to collect herbs from a herbal medicine seller's cart in exchange for cash. In this way, he bought several large 50-kilogram bags of salt. After the guests left, the cloth shop owner said to Frederick seriously, "That man was the king, huh?" Frederick was stunned. "He's like that, yes," the cloth shop owner said with a smile. "His country has 2,000 people." Frederick smiled and shook his head. "He was just a king of the hill." The cloth shop owner continued, "What they say in their own country is what they say, but in town, you have to obey, otherwise, don't expect to buy anything." Frederick could only smile and shake his head. The cloth shop owner continued, "You saw the feathers on his chest just now? For every 300 people in their country, the king can wear 1 feather. It's a symbol of national strength." Frederick thought about it. The data from the last year's census in Wesson showed that the total population, including locals and immigrants, was about 450,000. That meant he could wear 1,500 feathers on his chest. The picture was too beautiful to imagine. Before they could even start chatting, a count with 3 feathers on his chest came over, dragging the fur trader from across the street. The count wanted to buy 100 kilograms of salt. After finishing their business, Frederick asked the cloth shop owner, "Don't those noble lords have any money?" The cloth shop owner shook his head and said, "Why would they need money? They can get food and drink from the fields and the woods in the woods, so they just come out to buy some things." Frederick nodded and asked, "What's the most profitable thing to sell here?" The cloth shop owner said, "Of course, Wesson rifles from your Wesson state. But that's the royal family's business, we can't touch it." Frederick asked, "What's the least profitable thing to sell?" The cloth shop owner laughed and pointed to a shop at the end of the street. "That's the bookstore over there." Then he said disdainfully, "Those savages don't know how to read. That bookstore can't sell a single book. But now they'll rent it out to us and other people from other places to pass the time. At least they're not going to starve." Frederick shook his head helplessly. Just then, a group of men carrying long spears and several magicians passed by, looking like tough warriors. Frederick asked, and the cloth shopper replied, "They're all monster hunters, planning to take advantage of the rainy season to hunt monsters in the forest, just like you." The group paused to chat and then came over to ask Frederick if he sold salt loose. Frederick's salt came in 250-gram bags, with large bags weighing 50 kilograms. He opened a large bag and gave some to them, taking the opportunity to treat them to drinks that evening and ask them about the monsters in the forest. Seeing that Frederick was from the north and was traveling alone, and that he was here for training, not to compete for business, the monster hunters readily agreed. It was almost noon when another group arrived, led by the Queen, who asked Frederick, "How much salt do you have left? If it's not too much, I'll take it all." Frederick smiled and said, "I still have over 10 tons in my warehouse." The Queen replied, "I'll take it all. I have gold coins." Chapter 288, Suspended from Work in a Foreign Land. Another strange ceiling. Frederick lay in bed, staring blankly at the wooden ceiling. He recalled the events of the previous night. First, he had treated the group of warcraft hunters to roasted wild boar and wine, then asked them about the warcraft in the forest and what to watch out for, and finally, they'd all been bragging until they blacked out. When he regained consciousness, he checked his wallet. Not a single penny was missing, his backpack and sword were still unopened, and his belt hadn't been untied. It was already noon, and Frederick went downstairs to pay for his room and leave. To his surprise, the host said the warcraft hunters had not only paid but also reserved a meal for him. He thought they might get along, but since they were all from the same place, bound by blood, he offered to go with them to the forest, but was politely declined. However, he had received intelligence that the villages and towns within the forest were inviting warcraft hunters to settle there, both to clear the surrounding warcraft and to serve as mercenaries. Lunch arrived, and Frederick was struck by how the kingdom of Kush could stuff rice into anything. He'd eaten rice stuffed in tomatoes before, and now chicken stomachs. After lunch, he strolled through the town, planning to find an agent tomorrow to see if there were any that wanted a World of Warcraft hunter. He didn't know where the agent was, so he asked the cloth shop owner he'd met the previous night. The cloth shop owner pointed across the street and said, "Just go to the bookstore. That guy rents books there all the time." Frederick thanked him and then went to the bookstore, where the owner was idly swatting flies. The bookstore wasn't without customers. A middle-aged man in his 30s with curly black hair stared at the books on the shelf behind the counter, looking hesitant. Frederick thought his hairstyle looked familiar, but he didn't think much of it. He'd seen so many people from out of town over the years. Just as he entered the bookstore, the middle-aged man turned and, stunned upon seeing him, asked tentatively in Germanic, "Principal?" This time, Frederick was also stunned, frowning and asking, "Who are you?" The middle-aged man said, "I'm Bila, a lecturer in the Fine Arts Department at Wessenland University. Do you remember that 2 years ago, I applied for unpaid leave to return home to quell the rebellion, and you signed your approval?" Frederick scratched his head. It seemed like this had happened before, but he couldn't quite remember it. After asking Wessenland University a few questions, he finally confirmed the man's identity. Wessenland University also had some faculty and students from the north shore of the southern continent among those who had come from Constantinople, but the proportion was not high. Many had returned home after graduation in recent years, and even fewer remained. Frederick saw 5 feathers stuck in his chest and asked, "So you have successfully suppressed the rebellion and inherited the throne now?" Bila smiled bitterly and shook his head and said, "My father was overthrown, and I fled to the forest with my surviving family members and some people who were willing to go with me, and found a place to be our new home." Frederick didn't know what to say for a while, and thinking about where he was standing just now, he asked, "Do you want to buy a book?" Bila answered embarrassedly, "Yes, I didn't think so before. But now that I've become a leader, I find that my knowledge is not enough. There are many things that I thought I understood when I heard about them in school, but when I did it myself, I found that I actually knew nothing. There are a lot of sick people where I live now. I want to buy some books to take back and study, but I don't have that much money." Frederick looked at the books in the bookstore. Most of them were novels promoting the state of Wesson sold to the kingdom of Kush, as well as a small number of technical books on medicine, agriculture, etc., written in local languages. He is a rich man now. Not to mention the money he brought with him at the beginning and the money he earned from selling salt yesterday. The 400 gold coins in Wanjing City have not been touched. Before leaving Port Boss, Mrs. Sophie sent him 3 kilograms of gold coins and gold bars. He doesn't know what to do with this money. "Boss," Frederick suddenly slammed the counter. "Sell me all the books here in a package." "How much?" The bookstore owner was startled. After recovering his senses, he asked, "Are you kidding me?" Frederick estimated the number of books in the bookstore, put down his backpack, opened it, took out 2 small gold bars and placed them on the table, and asked, "Is this enough?" The bookstore owner was shocked when he saw the royal seal on the gold bars. He immediately replied, "It's much more." "I don't need that much." Frederick pushed the gold bars forward and said with a smile, "It's okay. If Bila wants any books in the future, you can help me buy them back. Of course, you can also run away with the gold bars." The bookstore owner immediately shook his head. He was joking. Anyone who could take out a gold bar with the royal seal was either a powerful person or a vicious person. He patted his chest and promised, "No, no, I swear by the flames that I will serve His Majesty Bila with all my heart and soul." Bila was also frightened and hurriedly said to Frederick, "Principal, how can I have the nerve to ask you to pay so much money?" Frederick glared at him and said, "You think I bought it for you? I'm building a lineage branch of the University of Wessenland, and I haven't decided on a location yet." Bila opened his mouth, unsure what to say, his eyes moistening. They were all adults now, and they all understood that some words meant one thing, but their meaning was different. Frederick took a gold bar from the counter and asked the owner to pack up the books, stationery, and paper. "Let's go," Frederick said to Bila. "Let's see if there's anything else we need to buy." Bila followed Frederick and asked hesitantly, "Principal, are you really going to build a branch?" The more he thought about it, the more he found the principal's actions baffling. He was just an ordinary lecturer at the school, and he had never spoken seriously to the principal. He didn't deserve the principal's help. Frederick smiled and replied, "You're no match for fighting. You're no match for making money. Just think of me investing in you. If the Forest Sea can find the resources that Wessenland State needs, I'll make my money back. If not, I'm just stupid." Then he complained to Bila, "How can you be so desperate? You've fallen so low as to hide in the Forest Sea. Why didn't you tell your family? Let's not even talk about restoring the country. Even hiring a few medical school lecturers to teach you how to treat illnesses would be fine. Wouldn't it be better for you to learn slowly on your own? You still don't have the money. Can't you get a bank loan as a university lecturer? You're worried about running out of money if you import some and sell it back. You know what those beautiful birds are selling for in Wessenland State these days? You wouldn't even need a loan to sell them back." Bila blushed, feeling a little embarrassed. He thought back to his recent experiences. Ever since his family was overthrown last year, he'd fled into the Forest Sea and found a decent place to stay. But he felt sluggish and lived a day-to-day life, never considering returning to school for help. This time, Frederick was going all out. The forest was a vast treasure trove. If he could find useful resources, that would be great. Otherwise, it would be considered a good deed. Bila was short of everything, from pots and pans to farm tools, not to mention weapons. So, over dinner, Frederick said to him, "Things here are too expensive. Buy what you need first. Larger quantities can be bought in bigger cities, where they're much cheaper." An old man at the table said, "Yes, yes, yes. My wife's brother is a merchant in the royal capital, Fustad. You can send someone with my wife's brother. I guarantee they won't bully us." The old man's name was Hijayaki, a town doctor. Frederick paid him to take his apprentice to Bila to treat patients and search for medicinal herbs nearby. Frederick thought for a moment, then said to Bila, "If you want to buy weapons from Wesson, I still have some in my warehouse. If you want more, you have to go to Constantine and I'll write you a note." Bila said a little embarrassedly, "A little weapons will be enough. I'll find a way later if it's not enough." Then he thought for a moment and said, "I'd better take people to Fustad. That's the principal's money, and I don't trust others to hold it. Buy the urgent things and send them back tomorrow. You can go with them." Frederick thought about it, then nodded in agreement. Chapter 289 Linhai's River. On a small river, over 30 meters wide, a large fleet of boats was heading deep into the forest at a speed of more than 10 kilometers per hour. Frederick, along with Dr. Hijayaki, several of his apprentices, and some of the people from the other side, sat in one of the passenger boats, curiously examining the cabin. The boat was a flat-bottomed boat about 10 meters long, surrounded by wooden frames, with planks like shutters nailed to the frames as bulkheads. From inside, one couldn't see outside, and even when it rained, the water couldn't get in, making it quite airy. He didn't ask why the boat was designed this way, but by noon he understood. Near noon, the scorching sun beat down on the cabin, and if the bulkheads weren't ventilated, the inside would be suffocating. Not long after, there was a gust of wind, and stones and clods of earth came in from the shore, clattering against the boat. The boatman could only ask the buffalo to run faster while he erected a plank to block the flow. Hideaki has been a doctor here for many years and often comes and goes in the forest. When he saw Frederick, he said inexplicably, "The shore is the territory of a group of directnuts. They will throw things at boats or magical beasts passing by. If the boat capsizes, they will swim over and take away everything they can." Frederick had heard about this kind of beast from magical beast hunters. Although they can't breathe fire like fire dragons, or their fur becomes as hard as rock, their limbs are extremely powerful, and when they are angry, they can slap a person's head off with a slap. Once Hideaki started talking, he couldn't stop, his voice crackling like the roar of the wind and rain outside. After introducing the 7 black baboons with 7 black spots on their bodies and the black ducks migrating to breed, he continued, "In the forest, the most terrifying thing is the various insects. You never know when they'll burrow into your clothes, pierce your flesh, and suck your blood, leaving half your butt exposed." Then another passenger on the boat chimed in, Bila's sister, Aisha. "Yes, many people have had these insects burrowed into their legs, unable to remove them, and soon died of fever." Aisha, in her 20s, had lost her husband in a rebellion. She fled to the forest with her 2 young children and some of her husband's family members, following her brother. Now that Bila was out wholesale supplies and delivering messages for Frederick, she was in charge of the caravan. Aisha remained silent, sitting by herself during Frederick's conversation until Hideaki brought up matters at home. When asked about his professional field, Hideaki said seriously, "If a bug bites into your flesh, don't force it out. Its mouth will latch onto the flesh, and pulling hard will get its head stuck inside, causing the bite to become poisonous. The simplest method is to dry clay, grind it into powder, and then boil it in a pot. Boil water to a depth of less than a finger's breadth, then add the clay powder and boil it until it becomes a slurry like snot. Let the slurry cool, and then cover the insect's buttocks and surrounding area. Insects breathe through the cracks in their buttocks, and if they're trapped, they'll crawl out on their own. Boil the water to a depth of less than 2 fingers breadth, cover it with a lid, and let it cool. When the bug emerges, use it to wash the wound. Once it's clean, apply a compress." Aisha listened attentively, repeating Hideaki's instructions in full after he finished. Frederick initially wondered if he could use oil to seal the insect's trachea, but then realized that oil was a valuable food source, while boiled and sterilized mud only required a little firewood. Hideaki continued, "During the rainy season, the swamps that flow into the river become ponds, and that's when the roe-bearing fish come in and lay their eggs. Roe-bearing fish are usually about the length of a wrist or fingertip, about the thickness of a finger. They feed on insects in the swamp, and their stomachs fill with eggs, eventually reaching the size of a fist. At this time, you can scoop up the female fish and take the eggs. The eggs are known to heal wounds and patients quickly. You can also wash the eggs, drain them, and salt them." Frederick asked curiously, "Are these roe edible after being salted?" Hideaki shuddered as if he had heard something horrifying. "I think they're awful, fishy and salty, but my wife's family loves them. I prefer them fresh, with a sweet, crunchy bite, but my wife hates them." Frederick pondered that if these roe could be used as a nutritional supplement, they would likely sell well. Just then, amidst the pounding of rain outside, a horn blared, and the boatmen at the bow and stern yelled for the poisonous oil to be poured out quickly. At the same moment, Hideaki, Aisha, and several other passengers leaped to their feet. Together with a helmsman, who had entered the cabin, they quickly untied several ropes from the cabin's ceiling. A wooden curtain was lowered, tightly enveloping the interior. Hideaki pulled Frederick back to back and said, "There are fire-striped snakes outside, as thick as fingers. If they get in, kill them with your weapons, be careful not to get bitten." "I can't save them," Frederick asked. "What about the buffalo?" Hideaki said, "The boatman pours poisonous oil, which water snakes are afraid of. But now that it's raining, I'm afraid the oil at the stern will be less, and the snakes will crawl up through there." As he finished speaking, someone screamed from the stern. Frederick stood up and saw a white snake, about a meter long, with red stripes, crawling in from outside the louvered bulkhead, searching for a gap in the wooden curtain. The screaming person instinctively threw a ball of ice mist, and the snake was engulfed in ice. But the snake seemed to warm itself, and the ice vanished in the blink of an eye. Frederick rushed over and killed the snake with a canning necromancy spell. The boatmen also sped up, and soon they were out of the fire snake's range. Once the boatmen confirmed the snakes were gone, all the passengers breathed a sigh of relief. Hideaki told Frederick, "The venom of this snake is terrible. You don't feel anything at first, but after a while, the surrounding flesh feels like it's been boiled. There's no cure, I heard someone dripped snake venom into raw egg, and the white immediately turned white, just like it had been boiled. Then he looked around, seeing no one paying attention, and whispered, I heard someone's researching using this snake venom to treat hemorrhoids. Frederick simply nodded, without commenting. It was lunchtime, and Aisha, along with a girl who had screamed, distributed lunch. In the kingdom of Kush, rice is a staple of everything. For the past few days, their dry rations have been rice and grape leaves. It's made by rolling grape leaves into a roll, stuffing them with soaked rice and a little vanilla, sealing the roll, steaming it, and then baking it dry. It's said the rice inside can easily keep for 2 or 3 days. The boxes for storing dry food were made of slime imported from Western state, with moisture-absorbing charcoal underneath. With this storage method, Frederick ate for 4 days without diarrhea, and everyone arrived at their destination safely. Chapter 290 Their New Hometown. Suddenly, a large school of colorful fish appeared in the river, swimming upstream at such speed that ripples formed on the surface of the water that lingered for several minutes. Hey Chichi exclaimed in surprise, there's another war going on somewhere nearby. Frederick curiously asked, how do you know there's a war? Hajichi pointed to the river and replied, those are rainbow fish. They're carnivorous. If an injured animal falls into the water, they'll follow the scent of blood. The more blood in the water, the farther it flows, and the more rainbow fish will follow the scent. The sight of so many fish now means many people have died upstream. Frederick mused, perhaps there's a war going on in one of the countries upstream. Then, Rosanna, the girl sitting next to Aisha, whispered, there's only our new home ahead. Rosanna was the one who had cast a frost spell on the fire-striped snake that had climbed aboard the boat a few days ago. She was also Aisha's late husband's sister, and since she saw Frederick could perform magic, she'd been asking questions non-stop. Frederick asked her in surprise, so, someone attacked your family? Rosanna replied nonchalantly, it's a common occurrence. Some people, seeing we're new here, want to attack us, and every time we're thrown into the river to feed the fish. Frederick was speechless. Bila and his men had fought their way through the land. Although there were many old and weak among them, their core strength was strong and more than enough to deal with the forest's bandits. The fleet arrived at their destination 2 hours later. Bila and his men named this place Xinqiang. About a kilometer from the dock, the river was boiling and churning violently, with severed limbs constantly floating up and being torn off. On the shore, a group of strong men were walking back, chatting and laughing. Rosanna ran to the bow of the boat and excitedly waved to her uncle. The fleet quickly took turns docking at the dock. The soldiers, who had recently laid down their weapons, chatted and laughed as they unloaded the cargo from the boats and placed it on the pier, where the blood and flesh had not yet been washed away. Frederick stood by the pier, surveying his surroundings curiously. The terrain was both good and bad. It was a basin, 3 or 4 kilometers in radius, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and a river on one side. The surrounding mountains rose to 500 or 600 meters, and numerous streams flowed down from them. Near the west, a hilltop over 100 meters high served as the town's base. The slopes had been largely cleared of trees, and the people had cultivated farmland there. However, the flat land within the basin was mostly swampland overgrown with reeds. Bila and his men had built a long wooden bridge connecting the town to the mountain road leading to the docks. This was why they chose the docks as the battlefield. If the enemy seized the docks and the wooden bridge, they could trap everyone in the town before the rainy season floods transformed the swamps into a lake. At this time, Rosanna's second uncle cautiously walked to Frederick's side, took a closer look, and said in surprise, so it's really the Duke of Wesson. Frederick turned his head to look at the old man, and replied with a smile, I don't think Bila would lie to you. It sounds like you have seen me. The old man introduced himself. My name is Robbie, and I used to be a scholar. Then he shook his head helplessly. I used to think I had profound attainments in the field of ice magic. I saw in Bila's letter that scholars at Wessenberg University were paid very high salaries. 3 years ago, I went to Wessenberg University, intending to seek a professorship to earn a little money. In the end, I was rejected in the first round of the interview, as you would say. They said that my knowledge structure was outdated and I couldn't go to Wessenberg University. I could consider going to elementary school to teach children enlightenment. When I came out of the interview, I saw you and Sage Manuel walking past, as if you were talking about how differentiation and integration would be required in future exams. Frederick nodded slightly. He had no recollection of Robbie, but it was around the time he'd requested calculus be made a required course at the University of Wessenland. Since then, the university has been receiving a large annual fee for retakes. After nodding, his old habit resurfaced, pointing to the swamp before him. Are you planning to develop this area? Robbie pointed to the eastern hill and replied, according to Bila's plan, we're going to burn the eastern hill. When the rainy season arrives, there will be a mudslide, and the washed-down dirt will fill the swamp over there. Frederick glanced over. The hillside was steep, but densely wooded. It seemed a considerable effort would be required to start a fire. Robbie then pointed to the swamp before them and said, during the rainy season, the river overflows, and the water here is over a meter deep. Bila wants to build a 2-meter deep dam here to turn it into a lake, so there won't be so many insects. Frederick looked over. The section of the basin facing the river was about a kilometer long, and the volume of earth above ground was only about 20,000 to 30,000 cubic meters. But underneath was swamp, and the foundation was unstable and leaking. He said, I'm worried about the foundation. Talk to Bila and fill it with small stones and clay first, compact it, and then build the dam. Robbie immediately agreed. The Duke of Wessen's engineering prowess was universally recognized, and he had heard of it often during his time in Wesson. The two chatted for a while before Aisha came to see Robbie. After a few whispers from a distance, Robbie said he had something to do. Aisha called Rosanna to take Frederick back to town. That evening, Frederick learned that Robbie had led his men to raid the enemy's home, bringing back rich loot and many young women. The majority of them were young and middle-aged, mostly guards and soldiers. Women were few, and many were daughters of several families. Older values still held sway, so population growth was a major concern. Outside, Frederick and Hijaki observed the women who had been brought back, acting calmly. They lined up on the roadside, each one glancing around in the torchlight, waiting to be chosen by the men. Robbie suggested that Frederick pick a few first, but he naturally refused, believing that was not the same as engaging in passionate sex. Meanwhile, an older woman and Aisha engaged in a heated argument, leaving Frederick unsure who was on the losing side. However, they spoke the local language, speaking rapidly and with a dialectic, and Frederick could not understand. Finally, Aisha was defeated. Frederick asked Robbie curiously, what's going on? Robbie was also a little confused. And it was only after a while that he answered. The woman said that fighting is a man's business, and if their men lose, it is natural for them to follow the winner. According to the tradition of lineage, they are our people once they enter our town. According to custom, the woman with the biggest butt should be paired with a man with the broadest shoulders. Hijaki on the side said, that's right. A woman who is good at fertility should be paired with a strong man, so that there will be more and more strong children. The locals also believe that if the father is strong, the child will be strong too. A woman with a small butt can't accommodate such a strong child, and she will die. There's nothing we can do about it. Too many people die in childbirth in lineage. You may not know that in some places, several countries will hold martial arts competitions regularly, and the first place winner can take home the woman with the biggest butt who comes to find a husband. Frederick nodded after listening. In such a harsh environment, shortage of supplies and poor medical conditions, the locals have their reasons for adopting this practice. Hijaki smiled and said to Robbie, hurry up and find a ruler. Don't delay doing good things tonight. Don't underestimate the women in the forest. Once they get stubborn, even 10 buffaloes can't stop them. Robbie thought he was knowledgeable, but this was the first time he heard of such a thing. He shook his head and said, I seem to understand. When I asked them to hand over half of the young women, I was worried that these women would cry and make trouble, so I prepared a lot of ropes. I didn't expect that when they came out, not only did they not cry or make trouble, but they also helped us move things. Frederick smiled bitterly and shook his head. In the current environment, combat effectiveness is the guarantee of survival. Being strong and powerful is equivalent to having a house, a car, and savings, which is equivalent to having an economic foundation. Whether it is society or family, whoever controls the economic lifeline must be obeyed. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 Setting Fire to the Mountain. A new day began with the crowing of roosters. Just as Frederick was about to open his eyes, he felt something pressing against him. It was smooth and slippery. If Aisha hadn't arrived just in time, the pitch-black python would have become Frederick's breakfast. "I'm so sorry," Aisha apologized profusely. For some reason, charcoal has always loved the smell of soap. Frederick watched the 7 to 8 meter long black python, thick as a calf, hiding behind Aisha like a child, and felt like a villain. The houses in the town were all wooden and mud huts, just as simple as those of the refugees who had just arrived from Wesson territory, even King Bila. Bila's daughter was in confinement after childbirth, so Frederick couldn't stay there, so he took up residence in the nearby woodshed, which, after cleaning up, could serve as a single room. These days, the people in the town couldn't expect to use soap as they used to. Everyone bathed with wood ash and water. Only Frederick had a few bars of soap in his backpack, which he had used once before bed. The woodshed wasn't far from Aisha's home, and unexpectedly, her snake, while grazing on mice in the middle of the night, discovered a scent it had long missed and loved. Frederick only then realized that Aisha was an animal trainer and the town's veterinarian. He naturally ignored such a trivial matter, and Aisha continued to prepare breakfast for the distinguished guest. Bila's political agenda bore a strong resemblance to the Wesson canton. For example, Aisha's 2 children, under 5, received an egg daily, just like the other children in town. Frederick's breakfast was the same, a bowl of boiled peas with half a dried, quail-sized bird. Aisha said apologetically, "In the past, I would have prepared a sumptuous banquet for His Excellency the Duke, but this is all we have. I know eating too many beans isn't good for you." "I'm so sorry." Frederick didn't eat the meat, but instead cut it in half and shared it with Aisha's 2 children. He said, "It's okay. I understand your difficulties. If Bila and the other scholars hadn't settled in Wiesenberg, I might not even have this. It's true that eating too many beans isn't good for you. Let me try making vermicelli with peas. Bila has eaten it before, but he probably can't cook it." Aisha thanked him politely and collected the remaining bones from the children into a small jar. After breakfast, the town's central fountain square came alive. This place had a unique natural advantage, a mountain lower than the surrounding ones, with an artesian spring at its summit. Beneath several wooden sheds, a 2-meter square spring pool served as the water source for the entire nation, and the water flowed into irrigation. In the center of the town square stood a stone pond about 10 meters long. Starting today, Hijayaki and his apprentices would heal people all over the country. Frederick strolled around casually, and finally, he and Rosanna came to the chicken farm on the edge of town to pick up eggs. The chicken farm here was quite similar to the one in Wesson State, with a special house for raising maggots to feed the chickens. In addition to insects, the chickens also ate grass and seeds cut from the mountains, but there were no high-tech equipment like incubators. After picking up the eggs, Frederick strolled outside the town. The surrounding hillsides were planted with beans, vegetables, and pumpkins. The pumpkins in the field were as big as volleyballs, and judging by the yield, it was estimated that the people in the town would not starve to death. There were many people working in the fields, mainly women and the elderly. Robbie was weeding in the pumpkin field, and Frederick went over to chat with him. "I bought these seeds from Wesson," Robbie said a little sheepishly. "I planted them in my garden. When I escaped, I was afraid I'd run out of food, so I brought a few with me. Now that we've settled here, we've tried to grow them, but unfortunately, we don't know how to grow them, and they were getting smaller and smaller." The pumpkins in Wesson were the size of cartwheels, while the ones here were much smaller, and his confidence was shaken. Frederick shook his head and said, "It can't be helped. The seeds sold in Wesson are magically enhanced, and the yield drops in the second year. Also, don't plant them continuously, alternate them with beans every 2 years. Small pumpkins have their advantages. Build a trellis for the pumpkins to climb. Leave 2 of the strongest vines on each pumpkin. When they're ripe, they'll hang down for easy picking, and birds won't eat them." Robbie took note of Frederick's advice and decided to give it a try. The high temperatures here year-round make it possible to grow pumpkins year-round. Frederick asked curiously, "Isn't the rainy season coming soon? Isn't it a bad time to plant now?" Robbie replied, "That's fine. Here, the rainy season is like every 3 or 4 days. We can build a shed and tear it down once the crops are grown." Seeing him say that, Frederick let him do what he wanted. The locals knew how to grow crops better. Robbie then said to Frederick, "Let's wait until noon, when it gets hot, and burn the eastern mountain." Frederick had no problem with their artificially created soil erosion to fill the swamp. However, since it seemed theoretically feasible, he didn't say anything more. If it failed, There would always be another forest fire in the forest. He then remembered a landslide in Wesson a few years ago. The newspapers had reported on the cause of the landslide, and Bela probably got his inspiration from that. At noon, Robbie and a group of 20 or so people set out on donkeys. They took the mountain path around the swamp and reached the eastern foot of the mountain. At noon, the wind picked up, a strong southerly wind. Frederick felt they had anticipated the wind. "Let's do this," Robbie said, hopping off his donkey. "Let's clear a safe zone first, or we might not be able to get back." Half of them were warriors, no problem chopping down trees and mowing grass, and they quickly cleared a safe zone half the size of a football field. Someone brought in jars and cans and poured kerosene onto the haphazardly stacked trees. Several magicians began chanting, and a moment later, a series of fireballs pelted the area where the oil had been poured, and flames quickly erupted. It had rained a few days ago, and the forest was still damp. To start a large fire, the initial ignition was crucial. Sufficient heat was needed to dry out the surrounding moisture, allowing the flames to spread further. The wind was strong today, toppling the tall trees on the mountain top and swaying their branches at the foot of the mountain. Thick white smoke filled the forest. Driven by the wind and the magician's constant fireballs, the flames grew larger and larger, soon reaching a height of 1 person and gradually growing stronger. The cries of fear from birds and wild animals echoed incessantly from the mountains. The smell of smoke and fire sounded like the footsteps of death to them, and they fled as far as they could. By nightfall, the entire sky was ablaze from the wildfires, and from the town, the opposite side looked like hell. Thick smoke, as if solid, blanketed the sky, and the ash that fell from the town looked like snow. Everyone gathered cloths to cover their mouths and noses. Frederick sat on a wooden wall, watching quietly as tree after tree fell in the flames. At dinner, Hijayaki explained that such mountain fires were not uncommon in the forest. Slash and burn farming was common in areas lacking flat land. After the trees and shrubs on the hillsides were burned, crops were planted for 2 or 3 years. When the soil became less fertile, it was left uncultivated. The next year, the wasteland was covered with shrubs. 2 or 3 years later, the trees had grown larger, and a few years later, it was time for another fire. The fire was not over until the next morning, and the once lush forest had been reduced to a mixture of charred black and ash. Many people came with tools and bags to collect charcoal, including the women who had arrived in the town not long ago. Chapter 292 Challenge Linhai. It rained. In the morning, it didn't seem heavy, just a gentle drizzle. Donning raincoats made of palm-sized, tough leaves resembling scales, I worked tirelessly in the fields. By noon, the swamp at the foot of the mountain was filled with water, with a black charcoal floating on it. When it got dark, I could see the moon and the stars. Unexpectedly, the next morning, lightning danced like giant pythons through the dark clouds, and the thunder never stopped. It seemed as if some god in the sky had drained the fish pond, sending all the water plummeting to the ground. In a town without clocks, people could only tell time by whether they were hungry or not. At dawn on the third day, the rain stopped. Almost the entire village labor force, skipping even breakfast, rushed out of their homes to the fields, salvaging whatever crops they could. The rain-damaged fruits and vegetables would be their food for the next 2 days. Frederick reached the wall and saw the marshland below reduced to a pool of yellow mud. Many aquatic animals had risen to the surface to breathe. Floating on the water were piles of charcoal, charred tree trunks, and bits of grass that hadn't been burned by the wildfire. The eastern slope had been scoured a yellowish earth by the rain, exposing many tree roots. A few more rains would surely wash them down the mountain. Hijayaki approached at noon and, seeing Frederick still there, curiously asked, "What are you looking at?" Pointing to the now clearer marsh, Frederick said, "I see they might succeed. If the rain continues, the mud washed down from the mountain will eventually fill the marsh. If they build a dam along the river, it's very likely that the land will be significantly higher than the river level. But there's a problem. If the groundwater can't be drained, the soil will become damaged." Hijayaki nodded seriously and said, "I don't understand." Frederick laughed. Everyone has their own strengths, and even what he said wasn't necessarily correct. At that moment, someone called them to lunch. Hijayaki, upon seeing the main course, exclaimed in surprise, "We're eating gold bars, instead of the boiled peas of the previous few days." The bowl contained finger-thick vermicelli noodles, which stood out beautifully against the clear chicken broth and lush green leaves. Hijayaki and his students had been treating the town's residents for the past few days. Aisha had provided them with the best a village could offer, and their diet was comparable to that of the hunters. Frederick smiled and said to her, I taught them how to make it yesterday. It uses peas. They're more flavorful and don't cause bloating. These pea vermicelli noodles were simple to make. Dried peas were ground into powder, stirred with cold water, and filtered through a cloth. The powder was then boiled until the water evaporated and allowed to cool. The filtered soybean meal could be eaten by humans or fed to chickens. Hijaki ate a piece of pea vermicelli and found it quite good. Yes, he said. I have bad teeth, so this won't be hard on me. As he ate, Frederick said, if it could be sliced thinly and dried, it would keep for a long time. It would also be convenient to take into the forest and eat. Just boil it in water and it's ready. Hijaki thought for a moment and said, that's great too. Those sailors and warcraft hunters will definitely like it. Frederick just smiled. It was up to them to figure out how to use it. Hijaki, also well informed, began to think about it. He eventually earned money by helping Bila and the others sell the dried vermicelli. In the afternoon, Frederick returned to his woodshed and began to organize his weapons, equipment, and wilderness supplies. He had come here primarily to hone his martial arts skills in the forest. Helping Bila was just a side job, the actual work still needed to be done by them. At this moment, Rosanna poked her head in and timidly asked, Duke Wesson, may I excuse you? Frederick, who was inspecting a whetstone, saw her and replied, come in and tell me what you want. He'd been helping out at the chicken farm quite a bit these days, and had become quite familiar with Rosanna. This was the first time he'd heard the young woman so hesitant. Rosanna hesitated after entering, then asked Frederick, excuse me, Your Excellency, may I learn magic from you? Frederick glanced up at her and replied, my time here is short, so I can only teach you a few spells and tricks. If you want a more systematic approach, I don't have the time. Rosanna quickly replied, no problem. I've learned some basic magic before, but I lack a truly effective offensive method. Frederick understood immediately. Survival here required force. Otherwise, it would be like a sheep falling into a wolf's den. Becoming powerful would be easy. He said hesitantly, I'm going into the woods tomorrow. I'll teach you when I return in a few days. Frederick had already found a place with the locals where the monsters in the surrounding area drank water. There were hunters' huts nearby, so there was no shortage of monsters to fight. Rosanna lowered her head and said hesitantly, can I come with you? I'm not the only one who wants to learn from you, and if we go together, we can look after each other. Frederick thought for a moment, then shook his head and declined. No, it's too dangerous where I'm going. I can't take care of you. Wait until I return. This is non-negotiable. Seeing his determination, Rosanna finally left. That evening, Hijaki came to Frederick with a smile and gave him a large bag of medicine commonly used by hunters. I underestimated you, Hijaki said with a sly grin. I thought you couldn't control yourself. Frederick, who was putting his medicine bag into his backpack, asked curiously, what do you mean you couldn't control yourself? Hijaki smiled and whispered, actually, I used to be a doctor in a noble family. Our master was killed by the Queen Mother, so I fled to the borderlands and lived in hiding. There are a lot of noble ladies here. They look down on ordinary men, but they can't live without children. How could they let a man as strong and prestigious as you go? Hey, someone asked me if I had pregnancy pills the past few days. Frederick was furious, then immediately understood what was going on. Ultimately, he could only shake his head. He had no intention of having an illegitimate child. These days, blood ties are a strong bond. It's one thing for two people to forget each other after a consensual passionate encounter, but it's another to leave a bond behind. Although the illegitimate child's status is inherited from the mother and the man can disown him, Frederick felt he couldn't abandon the child. So he made a quick decision. Please wait a moment, Frederick said to Hijaki. I'll write a letter. Don't tell anyone else. When Bila comes back, give it to him for me. He took out a pen and paper and wrote a letter about his decision to challenge the king of the forest to his limits. Hijaki remarked, it seems you've made up your mind. No wonder you've achieved so much at your age. He then added, be careful in the forest. Don't encounter mushroom fairies. Frederick looked up and asked, what are mushroom fairies? Hijaki said seriously, they appear in areas of the forest with abundant mushrooms during the rainy season. They are beautiful women, naked, wearing only mushrooms the size of a table. Don't think it's a good thing if you encounter one. They only have women, and to reproduce, they drain the men dry. Only a very few strong men survive. Frederick blinked and said helplessly, "Isn't this just poisoning from poisonous mushrooms? You make it sound so magical." He laughed and said, "That's how you remember it." Frederick was speechless. Chapter 293 Death Comes. No one knows the most terrifying beast in the forest sea, because everyone who has seen it is dead. Frederick recalled Hijaki's words to him before he left, and now it made perfect sense. The sound of wind piercing beside him distracted him from his thoughts. It was a dog's claw, powerful enough to rip through plate armor. Dang, the claw was blocked by the scabbard, making a metallic clang. A few more scratches were left on the sturdy scabbard, but the horse-sized, misty hound seemed unfazed. Frederick didn't know the breed of this giant dog, nor had he ever heard of it. He assumed that anyone who had seen it, like the hundreds of others around him, had lost their heads. He only knew that the hound was immensely powerful and lightning fast. A sword strike wouldn't even sever a hair from its body, and worse still, magical attacks were like feeding it. This relentless battle had been going on for half a day. Frederick had learned from the slapping of his fishing rod and spear, which had been shattered into U-shape and left a bloody wound on his forehead, that its eyes and nose could be damaged. But the giant dog was incredibly clever, foregoing its fangs and protecting its other eye and nose. Its equally powerful tail protected its vital points behind it, leaving Frederick unable to find a way in. After blocking another claw attack, Frederick felt a flattened helmet at his feet. He lifted it with his foot and launched a powerful kick at the giant dog's healthy eye. But the dog had no effect. It let the helmet crash into its face, then, taking advantage of Frederick's raised leg, leaped up and pounced on him with both claws. Frederick could only leap backward to avoid the attack, placing himself between the giant dog and a small town. The young and middle-aged men in the town had all perished, leaving only the elderly, the weak, the women, and the children. A giant dog inside would be like a rat in a rice jar. Frederick hesitated for a moment. This was just a small town he'd passed through during his training in the forest. He knew no one there, and if they all perished, no one would know he had stood by and stood by. But when he thought of the 11 or 12-year-old boy who had charged at the giant dog, brandishing a kitchen knife, only to have his head shoot up and swallowed, any thought of escape vanished. Frederick felt a bit foolish, but one should always do foolish things while young. The giant dog attacked again, and this time Frederick swung his sword at its incoming paw. He aimed for the flesh between its claws, his blade dancing with compressed lightning, the only magic that could do even a little damage to the giant dog. The paw deflected slightly at the last moment, and the claw sword perfectly blocked the blade. The other paw swung forward, faster than ever before, breaking through the scabbard's defense and slashing 2 bloody wounds across Frederick's chest. Frederick seized the opportunity to backhand and slash at the dog's leg. The recoil from the hilt made him feel like he was striking steel. The dog's leg was wounded, lightning splattering around the wound, but the giant dog simply brought the injured area to its mouth and licked it quickly, swallowing it. The black mist rising from its hide made the wound disappear in the blink of an eye. Frederick was helpless. The dog's movement was too fast, and he couldn't attack the mouth, where it had the least defense. At this point, he could only determine that the giant dog could quickly heal from minor injuries, but perhaps its eyes were too sensitive to recover quickly. As the sunset appeared in the sky, the giant dog seemed impatient, took a deep breath, and suddenly barked. Frederick was caught off guard, as if struck by a dump truck, his soul detached from his body. He could see himself receding further and further from his own back. He had been captured by Psyche many times to practice soul magic, but never before had he suffered an attack of this magnitude. After all, Psyche had no reason to kill him, and the shadow of death suddenly loomed over him. Watching his body recede, he tried to fly back, but found no ground to lean on, as if he were floating in a void. Frederick tried to reach out and search for anything useful, but suddenly felt that all movement in the world had slowed to a crawl. Wherever his hand reached, he could feel everything, from the dirt on the ground to the dust in the air, even the air vibrating with sound waves. Everything was within his grasp. As the hand extended further and further, he grasped more and more, soon encompassing his own body and the giant dog. But Frederick's soul still couldn't return to his body. He watched helplessly as his uncontrollable body fell. The giant dog leaped up, its hind paws kicking up a grass root in the mud, its bloody mouth aimed at his head. He anxiously explored his body, searching for a way back, but to no avail. The dog's mouth drew closer, finally engulfing the entire head, ready to crush it to pieces. Frederick suddenly felt a sense of peace within him. Death didn't seem so terrifying. After all, he'd already been hit by a dump truck and died once before. He'd survived here for over a decade, leaving behind the seeds of capitalism. He felt a sense of guilt for those around him, but overall, he could finally rest in peace. He wondered if he would simply vanish into thin air, or if he would live in his current state, perhaps even cross over again. He simply watched quietly, waiting for the giant dog to crush and devour his head, waiting for death to arrive. Just as the giant dog's teeth touched his skin, Frederick felt as if he had touched something strange. It seemed to exist not in this world, but in another dimension. As the fangs penetrated his dermis, he grasped the thing. This thing seemed formless, yet it seemed to contain an immense amount of information. At the first contact of the fangs with his muscles, Frederick seemed to understand the message within it, and it began to merge with his soul. The more he understood the message within, the deeper its fusion with his soul deepened. Frederick focused his full attention on the thing, and the fusion with his soul accelerated. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning as thick as an arm struck from the clear sky, striking both the man and the dog, leaving them charred. But this was only the beginning. Lightning struck again and again, and the dog fell to the ground, holding the man's head, twitching in the lightning. Frederick's soul trembled. He understood that the thing was the properties of electricity in the world. The more he understood, the more lightning struck. He suddenly felt his soul touch something again, but he ignored it. The feeling now was a bit like Richardnell's description of touching the realm on the path to transcendence, but the others hadn't been struck by lightning. But he couldn't dwell on it. The lightning began to wreak havoc in his soul, and the pain it brought almost made him collapse. He could only concentrate to prevent himself from collapsing. Countless lightning bolts fell one after another, and it didn't end until late at night. Chapter 294 To Survive. When Frederick awoke, he found himself lying in a wooden hut, the sky dimming outside. The hut was simple, its only decoration a woodcut on the wall. His bed consisted of soft straw piled high and covered with a cloth, and his pillow was a roll of straw wrapped in cloth. He stirred, barely regaining control. The wind outside carried a damp breeze. The rain that had been raging for days and nights had just subsided. For days, Frederick's soul had been struggling to reunite with his body. His body had retained basic functions, breathing and swallowing, digesting food. Soon, hearing and touch had also returned, but only for input signals. Output signals were only now returning. Perhaps because of his movement, the girls sleeping beside him awoke. Seeing him open his eyes, they exclaimed in surprise. The girls had been sent by the Queen, now the Queen Mother, to care for him. For days, Frederick had relied on them to feed him, take care of his excrement and urine, and clean his body. Soon after, the nation's Queen Mother, Ellie, and Queen Billy, newly crowned 2 days earlier, arrived in the room, followed by the Queen, bearing a bowl of porridge. The small nation had been ravaged by monsters, slaughtering most of its young and strong population. The immense pressure had left Ellie's hair gray overnight, and her fists, once powerful enough to kill a bear, were now barely enough to crush a chicken. Ellie sat on the haybed, a rare smile on her face. She looked into Frederick's weary eyes and said, "I'm glad you're awake. If you hadn't woken up, I wouldn't know what I would have done." Frederick had heard this voice sighing several times while unconscious, and smiled back. "Thank you for your care these days, Your Highness." "I wouldn't dare," Ellie said, hastily waving her hand. "You saved our lives." This is nothing. The nation's location resembled a massive meteorite crater, surrounded by impassable mountains and swirling rivers riddled with hidden rocks. It was both easy to defend and difficult to escape. Frederick had come here after discovering a mountain path that looked like it had been walked by humans. Ellie continued, "You must be hungry. Have some porridge first." With that, Billy sat down beside Frederick, holding a wooden bowl and offering to feed him. Frederick quickly refused, but Ellie said, "Just let her feed you. You saved us, and you could stay and be king." "So what's wrong with feeding you?" Frederick had nothing to say. He couldn't stay and be king, so he let Billy quietly feed him the bowl of rice porridge cooked with milk. After finishing his breakfast, Frederick saw what it meant to go on after a disaster. After eating something and being able to get out of bed, he went for a walk with Mint, the girl who had been taking care of him for the past few days. Mint was a year or two older than Frederick. A former hunter, she had been injured in a hunting trip the previous year, losing 3 fingers on her left hand, leaving only her thumb and index finger. Now she could only do relatively light work. Surrounded by mountains, This area boasts abundant water resources. Most of the farmland has been cultivated into paddy fields for rice, allowing for 3 crops a year, excluding the current rainy season. Some land is planted with beans and other vegetables, and pumpkins are planted on the slopes at the foot of the mountains. A white potato is also grown here, a staple food for most people. The harvested rice is primarily used to make wine and then traded with the outside world for goods. The rice harvest had just been completed, and today was a rare sunny day. The threshing grounds dried up quickly after the sun came out. Now, the surviving young and middle-aged people, as well as the elderly, women, and children, from the entire country, were working to dry the rice from the warehouses. Frederick and Mint sat on the top of the wooden wall, watching the busy threshing grounds nearby. The Queen and the Queen Mother were also busy there. Mint said to Frederick in a slightly hoarse voice, "The Queen and the Queen Mother have decided to close the country." Frederick was taken aback for a moment, but then quickly understood what she meant. The country now had almost no defenses. If the rest of the world knew about it, it would be plundered. The only way to survive was to isolate themselves and wait for the next generation to grow up. Frederick asked, "What about supplies like salt and iron?" Mint replied, "There's enough rock salt in the mountains for us, and there's some iron ore nearby." Frederick nodded, somewhat understanding their confidence in their closed-off state. In today's agricultural society, being self-sufficient and isolated for 20 years didn't seem like a big problem. However, productivity here was far too low. After a day of walking, Frederick and Mint discovered that the plows still used straight beam plows. There were many streams, but no water wheels. Other tools were also very primitive, leaving Frederick worried about their survival. As night fell and everyone prepared for their second meal of the day, Ellie said helplessly to Frederick, "We've only been here for 30 years, and we've finally learned to farm. Blacksmiths have good skills, but there are no good carpenters, and good carpenters from outside aren't willing to come." Frederick, understanding somewhat, said, "I'd like to stay here for a while and teach you how to make some tools." He felt as if he had gained some new abilities after being struck by lightning a while ago, and planned to familiarize himself with the place before leaving. Ellie burst into laughter upon hearing this. "Oh, thank you so much. You truly are a messenger sent by the mushroom god." Frederick merely smiled, wondering where this mushroom god had come from. Could it be some evil religious organization? He glanced at a bowl of mushrooms and rat stew that Mint had just served him, wondering if it was communion. Ellie added, "I have a humble request, and I hope you'll agree to it." Frederick asked, "What is it, Alice?" Ellie sighed deeply. "What we lack right now is population. Without it, we simply can't survive. Either we'll be captured as slaves by outsiders or eaten by new monsters. I'd like you to leave some offspring here. You're so strong, they'll surely be equally strong, so we can survive." Frederick's mouth twitched. He had previously run away precisely because he didn't want to leave behind illegitimate children. Ellie noticed he seemed reluctant and added, "Of course, if you don't want to, that's fine. We won't do anything to our savior." Frederick, taking advantage of her words, said, "Sorry, I can't do that." Ellie smiled and said, "It's okay. I was a bit rude. Just pretend I never said anything." "Alice, my hair has turned white in 2 days just to keep everyone alive. It's so hard." Frederick didn't have much to do, so he could only teach them some tips on increasing crop yields. "Mint," Ellie suddenly turned and called out, "Is the soup ready? Serve it up quickly, don't let your benefactor starve." She then said to Frederick, "They caught a bird in the threshing ground this afternoon. It's quite plump." Frederick just smiled and said nothing more. This palace was only a 3-story wooden building, not even as big as the small villa on the Wessenland estate. He couldn't expect too much. Mint quickly came over with a bowl of soup. Her left hand was uncomfortable holding the bottom of the bowl, so Ellie helped her place it on the table. The earthenware basin contained a cooked bird and a few vegetable leaves. Ellie didn't eat any of it, sharing it with Frederick and Billy, who sat nearby and looked shy. "You young people, eat more," Ellie said as she shared the soup. "I'm old, and just staying alive is enough." Frederick tried the soup and found it quite fragrant, perfectly suited to his taste. There wasn't much nightlife here, so after dinner, Mint opened a bucket of water and wiped him down, and then it was time for bed. Frederick had just lain down when a girl, whose voice he had heard recently, came in with a smoking earthenware basin, saying it was for mosquito repellent. There were plenty of mosquitoes here at night, and the spider webs outside the window were clinging to their prey. Frederick felt exhausted, thinking it was the after effects of the battle, and fell asleep as soon as he hit the bed. In another room, Ellie stood before several young women. She said solemnly, "The calculations indicate that these days are ideal for pregnancy. Whether we survive, our future, depends on you." Ellie then gave each of the women a potion, and after they drank it, she sent them to Frederick's room. Ellie then took a long list and marked the names of the women. A night passed, and the book will not tell you more. The next morning, Frederick awoke to daybreak, feeling he had slept soundly, sleeping through the night. Lying in bed, he pondered, "Let's build the curved plow today." Frederick remained unaware of the events of those nights until he left the country. Centuries later, when the world began to sequence genes, someone discovered a clue. Chapter 295, the final stage of the war. The forest air was exceptionally fresh after the rain. Colorful birds hopped and sang from the branches. Rabbits with donkey-like tails vigilantly ate tender leaves in the bushes. A leopard, as black as charcoal, stared down from a tree at a newly grown orangutan that had strayed from its group. Frederick saw everything around him, as if he had gained a God's perspective, visualizing it in 1 mm cubes of black and white pixels. A black insect, the size of a sewing needle, sensed the scent of human sweat and hopped and crawled toward its source, eager to suck a belly full of blood. Just as the insect was about to leap onto the girl's skin, a flash of lightning appeared out of nowhere, snapping it to charcoal. Mint sat quietly on a rock, a basket of cakes and light wine at her feet, gazing down at the workers building a water wheel below. The water wheel would greatly facilitate tasks like threshing, grinding, and adding chaff, and would also power the iron furnace, making the fire burn brighter. Not far behind her, beneath a large tree, Frederick sat cross-legged, eyes closed, observing the world in a new way. He wasn't yet proficient in this method, which seemed similar to the realms of the sword god and the magic god. While meditating and concentrating, he could see very far and in detail, but during daily activities like walking, his field of vision shrank to less than 100 meters, and his resolution went from 1 mm to 5 centimeters. While running or fighting, his field of vision shrank even further to 10 meters, with a resolution exceeding 20 centimeters. All Frederick could do now was practice more, mastering the technique through practice. If he couldn't, he'd have to ask Psyche or Richardnell back home. As the sun gradually climbed directly overhead, Frederick opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. The wind had died down 2 hours ago, and the mountain forest was quite hot and stuffy. This practice was exhausting, and he was drenched in sweat. Frederick took the linen towel that Mint offered him and wiped away the sweat. The towel wasn't very absorbent, and he had to shake it off after a few wipes to get rid of the sweat. Mint pulled a pastry from his basket. It was a creation Frederick had recently invented. Frederick first used local white sweet potatoes, cut them into pulp, filtered them, and precipitated a starchy mixture containing some plant fiber. This starch, dried and preserved for a long time, was then used to feed cattle and other livestock. This starch, mixed with soybean flour, salt, and oil, was then steamed into a cake, which he used as a midday meal. In his previous life, he had survived on similar pastries for 3 days after his wallet was stolen. While still crude, these pastries were much better than eating sweet potatoes directly, which scratched his throat. Mint handed the pastry over and asked, "When are you leaving?" Frederick replied, "In 3 days. I've already told the Queen." Mint hesitated, then whispered, "I have a favor to ask. Could you help me choose a name for my future child?" Frederick smiled. He knew the names of the animals and plants around him. Only a few educated people chose names with a story behind them. No problem, this patient, a patient with a severe case of the disease, smiled strangely. "I'll write down some names when I get back, and you can take your time choosing." In the space age, archaeologists on this mountaintop were scratching their heads over the tombstones inscribed with names like Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Harry. Frederick was busy in the mountains, but far away, someone who had indirectly crossed paths with him was not happy. On either side of a large river in the northern part of the Kush Kingdom, the Kush army and the Ghazi Empire army faced each other. Patrols occasionally passed along the riverbank, each side wary of the other, following Frederick's example and breaching the levee, flooding them. From within a magnificent tent draped with golden silk, the young Ghazi Emperor Fatis sullenly surveyed his generals and asked in a voice as calm as possible, "What should we do next?" No one present dared to speak. Over a month ago, the Ghazi Empire's northern and southern armies advanced side by side. The northern front, primarily composed of the Imperial Guard, surrounded the port of Bethsa, but thanks to Hayreddin's naval support, they were unable to capture it and could only resort to land siege, effectively halting the enemy's maritime operations. The southern front, the main force, triumphed throughout the advance. The Kushite army before them was unable to mount an effective defense, forced to relocate their forces and burn entire villages, relying on river traffic for a short delay. However, the southern front supply lines were stretched. Recently, a group of Kushite soldiers destroyed several key bridges in their rear, and the swollen river, caused by the rainy season in the forest, blocked the passage of the grain transports. Now, a large amount of food was trapped hundreds of kilometers to the east, and the barracks had only 10 days' worth of rations. If this problem wasn't resolved quickly, the entire army would face starvation. For a long time, no one responded from the tent. The logistics issue wasn't difficult to solve. Building a pontoon bridge was the solution. However, with the enemy facing a point of no return and the final decisive battle imminent, no one wanted to give up such a significant military achievement to return to logistical support work, which offered little credit and was easily blamed. Fata glanced at his warlords again, feeling a surge of irritation, sensing he was losing control of the situation. No matter what the situation, the moment of complete loss of control was the most dangerous. After a long silence in the tent, someone finally spoke up. An old duke, his beard completely white, spoke, "Your Majesty, the river is flooding. We need the royal guards to control the northern estuary. Otherwise, if the Kushite navy sails upstream, we will be surrounded." Fata's expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly wondered if the Kushite had destroyed the bridge to allow the warships to sail southward. "Send a message to the Imperial Guards," he ordered immediately. "Use some, if not most, of your forces to monitor the river. If any fleet sails south, sink it and block the waterway." Fata glanced at the warlords and singled out the one with the worst relationship with the others, issuing the order, "You, take your men eastward immediately. Build a pontoon bridge and deliver the food within 5 days." The minor warlords, designated by name, could only emerge from a corner of the crowd to receive the order. Meanwhile, on the flagship of a fleet in the northern inland sea, Hayreddin and a group of captains watched silently as Jurgen, commander of the Wessenland cavalry guard, pulled 3 silk bags of different colors from his briefcase. "What are these?" Hayreddin asked. Jurgen confidently replied, "This is the battle plan the commander sent before entering the forest. He ordered us to open it before His Excellency the Marshal if we come to help." Hayreddin had borrowed 500 men from the Wessenland garrison in Constantinople, men who had the authority to refuse overly dangerous missions. Now that he had heard that it was a plan left by Frederick, out of trust in the famous general, he signaled Jurgen to open it and, if there was no problem, adopt it. Jurgen took out a piece of paper from each of the 3 silk bags and spread them out on the table. Chapter 296 The Plan in the 3 Silk Bags. Under the moonlight, a vast fleet set sail in silence, heading for the main channel of the Sun River, over 100 kilometers west of the port of Beausset. The crews aboard were experienced sailors, capable of maneuvering against the wind. On deck, Jurgen lubricated his new warhorse and checked for rust from the sea voyage, trying to ease his slightly nervous nerves. Hayreddin took out a bottle of steaming happy water and handed it to him, then asked with a smile, "Is this your first time leading a team by yourself?" Jurgen took the happy water and said a little embarrassedly, "Yes, you saw through it." Hayreddin smiled, leaned against the side of the ship, looked at the moon in the sky and said, "You are exactly the same as me when I first became captain. You are always worried that you will lead a ship full of people to the bottom of the sea. You have to ask about everything and you are so nervous that you can't sleep." Jurgen leaned on his warhorse, took a sip of happy water and said, "The commander said that if I perform well this time, I will be promoted next year." Hayreddin laughed and said, "I heard that you grew up with Duke Wesson. He will never neglect you, otherwise he will have no one he can trust." Jurgen shook his head and whispered, "The commander is different. There was a man who helped the Wesson family do business for many years. He made a crime and was sent to Cod Island to mine. He hasn't come back for several years." Hayreddin had heard of this but didn't take it seriously. After guzzling his happy water in one gulp, he said, "Get some rest early. The fleet will turn tomorrow afternoon, and then it's up to you." Jurgen nodded. Hayreddin's fleet wasn't equipped for land combat, the land battles would depend on these mercenaries. Jurgen checked his warhorse's joints and ran a system check. Only after finding no problems did he return to his cabin. Under the light, he opened a silk bag left by Frederick and pulled out a note. It read, Battlefield maneuvers aren't limited to the battlefield itself. The lower reaches of the Sun River have numerous tributaries, allowing for large-scale maneuvers around to the south and then back north to avoid enemy spies stationed at the tributaries' mouths. Hayreddin's navy now adopted this strategy. Around 9 o'clock the next evening, a portion of the fleet began to dock at the river's edge, about 30 kilometers south of the port of Bursay. Jurgen replaced the note in the second silk bag, confirmed his control necklace was securely fastened, and strode out of the cabin. Everyone on the deck was busy. The war horses, resting on the deck, slowly rose to their feet after being activated, their eyes glowing a dark red. A group of All Might students were testing the horses, ensuring they would perform well in the upcoming battle. The sailors on the ship were also busy, using the ship's crane to lower crates of weapons, and they activated war horses to shore. Also lowered were wine and sheep, which some sailors slaughtered and roasted by the river. Jurgen carefully inspected everyone's horses and equipment, ensuring they were in good condition, and then led everyone to form up in an open area nearby. The sky was heavily cloudy tonight, and the moon had periodically hidden, its light flickering. Hayreddin led his men over, and the sailors behind him, some holding bowls and some holding wine, personally filled the golden bowls held by the Wesson soldiers participating in tonight's operation with fine wine. He raised his bowl and addressed the 100 or so silent men before him, saying, "Tonight, I'm counting on you all. Please make sure you return home safe and sound, and let's drink together." He then emptied his own bowl in one gulp. The sailors grilled the lamb, and the offal was cooked into soup in the ship's pressure cooker, ensuring the Wesson army was well fed and watered. At midnight, Hayreddin stood behind the ship's side, watching Jurgen and his cavalry vanish into the darkness. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Jurgen, perched on his war horse, observed the Ghazi Empire camp outside the port of Bursay through a telescope. Because Bursay had been on the defensive and had not launched a counterattack, the Ghazi Imperial Guards were unable to penetrate, so they began to slack off. Now, the camp was a world of difference. Inside, silence reigned, save for the flickering glow of fires, while behind, the merchant camps accompanying the army were brightly lit, their melody echoing far into the night. Jurgen dismounted and began to prepare for battle. The greatest advantage of the golem puppet horses they were riding was their large carrying capacity and endurance comparable to that of tractors. Besides the personal equipment, they also brought a large number of rockets. The Wesson Army's current combat routine was to begin with an artillery barrage, and tonight's operation, commanded by Jurgen, was no exception. However, the rocket's accuracy was still limited, requiring close proximity to the target for maximum effectiveness. Taking advantage of the moon being obscured by clouds, he had 2 magic incendiary bombs, each worth 500 gold coins, positioned 100 meters from the merchant camp, with a launcher set to fire in half an hour. He then deployed a timed rocket barrage at his current ambush location, set to fire an hour after the first 2, covering the merchant camp and the surrounding area. Finally, Jurgen led his men in a detour, arriving in a different direction from the camp, where they lay in wait. When the time arrived, 2 massive white balls of fire suddenly erupted from the merchant camp, illuminating the clouds above. A series of horns blared from the Ghazi Empire camp, sending the camp into chaos. Lower-ranking officers began to intervene to maintain order, resenting the fact that the high-ranking officials were enjoying fine wine and beautiful women with the merchant camp while they had to do the hard work. At that moment, someone shouted, "Duke Wesson is here!" The officers flinched, and the entire camp became increasingly uncontrollable. Jurgen was distraught. He hadn't expected the enemy to blow up. Even more distraught was Wheel. He had only gone out to use the restroom, so why was there smoke? Wheel, still dazed by the alcohol, stumbled. By the time he realized the smoke was from a fire, the straw roof had collapsed. Wheel, one of the deputy commanders of the Ghazi Imperial Guard, had vanished. His whereabouts remained a mystery for centuries. Some said he had escaped and gone into seclusion, while others believed he was secretly executed by the emperor. Until developers building new housing in the area unearthed remains from the remains of a septic tank. Jurgen didn't wait for the second wave of rockets, he immediately ordered an attack. Ahead of them, in the watchtower, the startled sentries stared in amazement at the engulfing merchant camp, turning only when the sound of horse hooves reached them. A row of war horses, their eyes glowing red, emerged from the darkness. These steeds towered over the finest horses, their riders' eyes glinting with light. A sentry, remembering a rumor, leaped from his watchtower, shouting, "The Devil's Legion is coming, and vanished into the camp. The mechanical war horses leaping over the 5-meter-high wall. Jurgen and his men were now intent on slaughtering and burning everything. Like the blades of a blender, they whirled, nothing stopping them for a moment, leaving a trail of shredded flesh in their wake. The forage camp at the center of the camp was within sight. Jurgen, remembering his magedom, drew his staff and began to cast a spell. In that instant, the surrounding crowd fell silent, their gazes fixed on the golden eagle soaring in the wind. With a wingspan of over 20 meters, the eagle circled above the camp, its feathers dripping with golden flames, consuming everything in its path. Meanwhile, a second round of rockets was launched automatically. The wind blew, and many of them fell into the camp, completely crushing the Ghazi Empire's army. After that night, the story of Jurgen the Golden Eagle raiding a camp with 100 riders without a single casualty spread throughout the inner sea. The troops of Bursaport seized the opportunity to storm out of the city gates. They lacked the courage to confront them head-on, but they were quite adept at catching them by the tail. The stone bridge over the river where Frederick had once fished was suddenly blocked, and many men jumped into the water, attempting to swim to the other side. Suddenly, a line of men with large eyes and long noses emerged from the opposite side, raining bullets upon them. The flying tulip appeared on the river, its artillery joining the carnage. Soon, the ship was forced to retreat due to the heavy flow of bodies. The radio in Bursaport relayed the battle situation immediately. Over 40 kilometers south of the Ghazi Empire's southern front army, one of Hayreddin's right-hand men placed a note in a silk bag. With a wave of his hand, a violent explosion erupted on the river bank, and the water surged into the distance. The next morning, Fateh, standing on the military camp wall, saw fish weighing at least 20 kilograms leap 100 meters ahead. Although the military camp was on a high ground, it was surrounded by waist-deep water, and the outcome was self-evident. Chapter 297 Lin Hai's last stop. It often takes a month or two for news of major events outside to reach the forest. Frederick, unaware of the Ghazi Empire's initiative to negotiate, was in a canoe, sailing along the river, taking whatever path led him there. He had carved his own canoe from a large tree, making it much more convenient for water travel. Simply follow the current, and any path will lead to the sea. Only those who could navigate the forest alone were ruthless. The monster hunters and caravans he encountered along the way, while not always respectful, were polite enough. Some were exceptions. That afternoon, Frederick encountered a fleet loading cargo near the shore. The owner, a monster hunter guild, was a merchant. The arrival of the rainy season, with its swollen rivers and flooded swamps, expanded people's reach, allowing them to reach areas inaccessible during the dry season. By the end of October, the rainy season was drawing to a close, and the monster hunters who had come to hunt were beginning to return with full loads. "Excuse me," Frederick paddled over to a young sailor feeding buffalo by the boat. "How do I get to the nearest city?" The sailor, slightly younger than Frederick, noticed a man's disheveled appearance, unshaven beard, and tattered clothes. He casually pointed downstream and said, "Just go down the left bank." "Thank you," Frederick said, picking up a bright red fruit from the boat and tossing it to the young sailor. An older sailor approached and slapped the young sailor on the back of the head, saying, "How dare you give directions like that?" The young sailor replied nonchalantly, "I'm just out for fun." "He'll probably come to the palace when I get back." Frederick, unaware of the conversation between the sailors after he left, sat in his canoe, leisurely eating the same red wild fruit for lunch. This unnamed red fruit was rare in the forest. It tasted sweet and provided a good source of energy, but it turned his urine and feces bright red, which had previously frightened him at Ellie's. Lunch included fruit and barbecue. Last night, they'd shot a pheasant. They discovered that the meat, cooked like beggar chicken, could be kept for 2 or 3 days if roasted over a high fire for a long time without damaging the outer layer of mud. More than 2 hours later, Frederick burped and suddenly noticed the water around him was flowing faster and faster, with a faint roar. Ahead lay a waterfall with a drop of over 300 meters. Below it lay a vast basin, and on the hill in the middle stood a beautiful castle. Farther to the north lay the sea. With Frederick's current strength, he could use the winged hussar's gravity-reducing magic to fall from such a height without suffering any harm. However, Frederick had heard that the nobles along the inner sea spoke the ancient Pulan language, so he swam to shore and asked 2 young men, "Gentlemen, may I ask where we are?" The younger of the 2 men hid behind the older one. The anger in the older one's eyes receded slightly, and he replied coldly, "This is Count Valley's domain." Frederick thanked them and immediately turned and swam away, pretending not to notice two skirts lying on a rock near the shore. After he left, the younger sister trembled and asked, "Sister, why did you let him go?" The older sister looked up at the top of the waterfall in feigned calmness. "Anyone who can safely descend from the top of the waterfall must be incredibly powerful. He's given us a step down. Talking too long will only make things worse." The younger sister agreed, though the step was unnecessary. Frederick swam 2 kilometers across the lake with his backpack before finding a place to land. Fortunately, he'd wrapped his luggage with a tarp, fearing the canoe might capsize. Not only did the backpack stay dry, it also served as a lifeline. The water at the lakeside looked crystal clear, devoid of blood-sucking insects, and a few fish swam by. Frederick pondered for a moment, gathered some leafy branches, and burned them near the water to collect the ash. He planned to take a good bath and change clothes before heading back into town. This was the final stop on their journey through the forest. After a short rest, they'd find a boat to their master's wife's house for some food and drinks. At the water's edge, Frederick shaved with a knife and cut his hair short, feeling instantly refreshed. Though parasite-free, he was still covered in dirt. Rubbing some wood ash in the water for a while actually helped to lower in the water. Not only did the fish in the water, but the birds in the sky seemed to be more numerous too. From the sounds of their diverse species, they gathered in large groups, as if at a concert. Frederick paid no attention and continued scrubbing in the water. Ah! A startled cry made Frederick shudder. Less than 10 meters behind him, in the bushes, stood a woman in her early 20s, dressed in hunting clothes, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at him in disbelief. Ah! The woman's face flushed. "This gorilla is sick. It's almost lost all its hair." Then, in a low voice, she said, "There's a bathing place in the city." With that, she turned and ran deeper into the woods. The hairless gorilla froze for a moment, then broke out in a cold sweat. He hadn't even noticed anyone approaching. This place looked a bit eerie. Frederick, uncaring that he hadn't washed himself properly, pulled fresh clothes from his backpack, put them on, burned his old ones, and then ran off as fast as he could. As the sunset appeared, Frederick had passed through several kilometers of forest and 10 kilometers of agricultural land, arriving at the city in the center of the basin. The city looked bustling. Judging by the clothes and accents of the people walking by, half were merchants from other places. Walking through the many shops, it became clear that the local specialty was silk. Not just silk from silkworms, but also the cheaper spider silk, woven into fabrics equally exquisitely. Frederick found a random guide and asked him to take him to the bank to exchange money, then to the city's bathhouse. Judging by its architecture, the bathhouse was estimated to be 700 or 800 years old, belonging to the ancient Purian Empire. It had both a vast public bathhouse and private rooms suitable for small gatherings or private conversations. Frederick had originally intended to go to the public area, but after a few musclemen approached to inquire about his muscular build, he decided to book a private room. The private rooms were much better, with 2 pools, hot and cold, and a table and bed for relaxing and chatting. There was no shortage of delicious food and drinks. After all, it only cost 1 gold coin a day. Naturally, there were back scrubs and massages, and Frederick ordered the most expensive one. After a scrub that made him lose 2 pounds, the most skilled woman in the bathhouse asked Frederick, "Would you like any of our special services?" Frederick asked cautiously, "What are they, and will they cost extra?" It's never too cautious to ask when you're out and about. It's important to ask the right questions. The woman replied, "No extra charge, it's our new back massage." Frederick turned to look at the woman, who weighed over 200 pounds, and, thinking of the countless challenges life holds, he finally agreed. The woman's massage skills were truly impressive. After a gentle massage and a back-stomping ballet, Frederick's tense muscles relaxed. Frederick soaked in the hot tub, sighed comfortably, and muttered in a dreamlike voice, "Sister, are you interested in joining my family? 20 gold coins a year is negotiable." The elder sister, preparing some floral essential oils for later use, shook her head and said, "No, next spring my family and I are moving to Oak City in Wesson State. The Duke of Wesson's wife has invited me to be a teacher. 50 or 60 gold coins a year is no problem." Frederick raised an eyebrow, recognizing the person. Wesson State now has a policy encouraging artisans to open training courses, and this policy favors the emerging Oak City on the canal, attracting skilled artisans from all over. "That's great," Frederick nodded. "You can go to the military affairs department and find Franz. Tell him I Charles Smith recommended him. You can start by training him as a medic, the older sister politely said. Thank you for your kindness. Then, with a sigh, she said, what a pity for my sister. Such a beautiful girl, she lost her legs at such a young age. I wonder what she'd do. Surprised, Frederick asked, what happened to her? The older sister said nothing more. She asked the client to lie down on the massage bed and began to massage his skin with oil. She was solely responsible for the massage. Then, another sister served him delicious food and wine, and waited for him to eat and rest. Frederick hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. After eating and drinking his fill, he yawned and went to bed nearby, sleeping until noon the next day. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 Help by Books. Frederick spent several days relaxing at the baths, enjoying a bath, a massage, and a few drinks. He would go to the small theater to watch new plays like Duke Wesson Saves the Prince Alone and Duke Wesson's 3 Stratagems of Silken Bags to Defeat Ozzy, or read in the library. After a satisfying meal, he slept until he woke naturally, completely relaxing. One morning, as he checked out of the baths, he blinked at the thick white fog that blanketed the streets. The streets were silent, and even asking for directions was impossible. He walked slowly, carefully counting the intersections and turns, until he finally found the inn with a pomegranate on its sign. It was a fairly large inn, owned by the mother of the massage therapist at the baths, and many small business owners lived there. The layout was similar to other inn locations. The first floor was a dining area with numerous tables and chairs, and in the back was a counter, behind which stood a wine rack. Because of the early fog, no one had gotten up, so the place was quite deserted. Only a pretty girl of 17 or 18 was cleaning glasses behind the counter. As Frederick approached, the girl looked up, staring intently for a moment, then covered her gaping mouth with her hand in surprise. Do you recognize me? Frederick asked curiously. The girl, regaining her composure, said cautiously, I met you in Constantinople. Frederick nodded. After conquering Constantinople, they had given travel expenses to all the women in the palace that Phocas had gathered from all over. Just pretend you don't know me, Frederick smiled. Is this your home? The girl nodded and prepared the best room in the hotel for him. Frederick went to his room on the 3rd floor, where he put his luggage. A moment later, there was a knock on the door, and the girl at the counter arrived with breakfast. It looked quite interesting, consisting mainly of 2 long loaves of bread with a sliced hard-boiled egg and jam, and a glass of juice. Frederick then noticed that the girl's right leg was a piece of wood and asked, What's wrong with your leg? After putting her breakfast aside, the girl replied respectfully, Your Excellency, my name is Puna. 3 years ago, I was kidnapped by the tyrant Phocas men and taken to Constantine. Because I refused to serve him, he cut off my leg and kept it in the palace to intimidate others. Frederick thought for a moment, remembering he had heard of this story before. He said to Puna, Go down and rest. There's no need to run around and tire yourself out. Puna hesitated, biting her lip, and asked, Your Excellency, may I ask you a question? It's about Wesson. Frederick pointed to a chair at the table and said, Sit down and ask. He sat down himself. Puna said cautiously, My sister is going to Wesson next year, and my family will be going with her. Then she looked at her right leg and asked, Can someone like me find work there? Frederick examined her leg. The cut was probably just above the calf, but the knee should be fine. Can you read? Frederick asked. Puna nodded quickly and said, We run a hotel, and we meet guests from many countries, speaking multiple languages and scripts. Frederick thought for a moment and said, I have a suggestion. You could sign up for a typing class. It's a bit like being a copyist. Once you learn how to type, you can earn a decent income, whether you find a job at a chamber of commerce, a factory, or even open your own typing shop. 7 years ago, All Might developed a calculator based on the golem puppet core. 2 years ago, in addition to their administrative work, they finally developed a commercially viable typewriter. Now, a snack street has formed in front of the factory, lined with people waiting to pick up their goods. While the typewriters were expensive, Puna's sister was a skilled technician who had come to run a school, and with Lilu's letter of introduction, she had no problem getting a low-interest loan for targeted purchases. Frederick explained the relevant policies to Puna, and she listened intently. Currently, foreign workers in Wesson are having no major problems. The only difficult issue is with adherents of other religions. Frederick decided to have a proper conversation with the Pope during his visit to the Holy City. After Puna left, Frederick had breakfast and rested until around 9 o'clock. By then, the fog had dissipated, and the streets began to bustle. While strolling through the streets, Frederick noticed that, while hot, the weather was considerably cooler than a while ago. It was almost snowing in Wesson. He wandered around the streets, noticing that half the shops were filled with silk, and an idea came to mind. BASF hadn't made any breakthroughs using slime glue to make synthetic fibers, and it seemed unlikely that similar materials like nylon would be developed anytime soon. The Kirov airship had recently demonstrated its prowess, and the Air Force needed to expand its fleet. Currently, silk coated with slime glue performed best for airship airbags. So, Charles wanted to see if there was a cheap and strong silk to reduce the cost of the airship. Such matters naturally required seeking experts, but he was unfamiliar with the area and had no idea where to find them. Frederick looked up at the castle on the top of the hill beside the city, thinking that it would be most convenient to find the lord here, Count Valley. But he came empty-handed and had nothing to prove his identity, so he might be chased away as a liar. He finally decided to go back and ask Puna first. There were more and more pedestrians on the road, and the store in front was full of people. Dozens of young men and women stretched the line to the store next door. Frederick walked over to take a look out of curiosity and found that it was a bookstore. There was a blackboard hanging on the wall next to the door, with chalk writing on it, Lord Kingju's latest poetry collection The Sea Breeze Returning to the Port has arrived, priced at 2 Valley silver coins. Looking at the line that was getting longer, Frederick smiled and turned to leave. Sir, someone in the line stepped forward and grabbed Frederick's scabbard, his back foot still standing. Do you want to buy Lord Kingju's book too? Could you please stand for me for a moment while I go to the bathroom? I can buy you an extra copy. Frederick saw that the young man was in his early 20s and looked a bit wealthy from his clothes, so he said, if the person behind you doesn't mind, I can hold your seat for you. The young man asked a few people, and they all agreed. Frederick held his sword upright and stood over. The man quickly ran to the restaurant across the street. The book sales had just begun, and the line gradually moved forward, but the young man hadn't returned yet. Soon it was Frederick's turn. He took out 2 local silver coins and bought a copy of The Sea Breeze. Returning to port, he left the bookstore and waited for 10 minutes before he saw the young man dragging his numb feet out of the restaurant, his face dead. Chapter 299 Book Friends Tea Party. With the development of publishing and trade in Wesson, many local customs have spread to other areas. For example, the book bar here is like a paid library. Upon entering, you can pay to sit until sunset, and the price increases after dark when the lights are on. The walls of the first floor are lined with bookshelves and long tables and chairs for reading. In one corner, there's a place to eat, and a counter selling pens, ink, and notebooks. The second floor offers private rooms, a pleasant air-conditioned environment with delicious snacks and tea, perfect for quiet reading. The young man who had asked Frederick to help him line up was named Damon. He warmly invited Frederick to a book bar near the study. After telling the proprietress that all expenses for this gentleman would be charged to his account, he went to the private room upstairs. A sign on the door read his name, indicating that it was a long-term lease. Frederick noticed that there were still many books on the shelves, mostly literary works. Besides Kingju, the author of today's poetry collection, and his own name, there were also many he had never heard of. Eamon explained, "This building is my home. This is where I read and relax. It's much more relaxing than at home." Frederick realized he was the landlord. The books were all printed in Wesson, but with so many books available these days, he naturally couldn't read them all. So he took a copy of Plummer's Travelogue of the Southern Coast of the Inland Sea. Seeing him take the book, Eamon apologized. "I'll be engrossed in it later. If you need anything, please feel free." Frederick thanked him. Eamon was indeed engrossed in his reading. He didn't even look up from the waiter's service when he was served tea and snacks. This book, Sea Breeze Returning to Harbor, is themed around family and affection. It contains 30 new poems and 30 older poems on the same theme, a traditional practice among poets today. It both increases the volume's length and allows for a clearer perspective on the differences between the new and older poems. He opened the book, revealing each poem printed on the left, with accompanying illustrations on the right. The room was silent, with only the occasional rustling of pages. Soon, Eamon began to recite with great emotion. By noon, Eamon had only a little tea and a few cookies, then continued to bury his head in his book. Frederick was also absorbed in his travelogue, pondering his next course of action. Around 2 in the afternoon, the door to the private room suddenly opened, and a young woman rushed in, dragging Eamon out, shouting, "Hurry up! The second young lady is having a tea party this afternoon, and she specifically wants you to attend." The young woman was about the same age as Frederick. Although she was wearing a cute dress, her arms looked like they could punch a cow to death. Eamon was quickly dragged from the sofa. "Annas," Eamon cried, "we have a guest." The girl, named Annas, only then noticed Frederick and blushed. Eamon said apologetically to Frederick, "I'm so sorry, this is my fiancée." Frederick stood up and said, "It's okay. Since you're busy, I won't bother you anymore." Eamon thought for a moment and said, "If you're free, why don't you join me at the second young lady's salon? She loves hearing guest stories about the outside world." Annas chimed in, "Yes, yes. The second young lady isn't well and can't travel far. She loves hearing stories." Frederick saw that their clothes were all pure cotton, fine, but not the silk of the rich and powerful, and thought the second young lady must be one of their circle. He agreed, hoping to get a free meal. However, he was mistaken. Silk was abundant in the region, and young men of character didn't wear silk products, but rather machine-woven cotton from the canton of Wessenland. So, Frederick took the carriage of Annas, the youngest daughter of Count Valley's knight commander, and accompanied Eamon, the youngest son of the count's chief steward, to a villa on the hillside of the castle. In the back garden, they met Count Valley's second daughter, Yvette Valley. There was a moment of awkwardness when the two met, but Yvette quickly recovered, pretending she hadn't seen the hairless gorilla by the lake a few days ago and politely welcoming the distant guest. Frederick also pretended not to have seen her and politely introduced himself, Charles Smith from Wessex. "Thank you, Miss Yvette, for your hospitality." The tea party was held under the shade of the trees in the garden. 8 people, all in their teens and 20s, half men and half women, sat on the fine carpet. Except for Frederick, each of them had a copy of the Sea Breeze of Homecoming in front of them. The theme of the day was self-evident. Yvette had the servants bring some food to Eamon and Frederick, and said with a smile, "I'm sure Eamon was so engrossed in his reading that he forgot to eat lunch, and even bothered the guests." Everyone else laughed, clearly not the first time this had happened. The tea party quickly returned to its main topic, and with Yvette's guidance, everyone began to discuss the Sea Breeze of Homecoming, which had just arrived that morning. Discussions among book lovers have focused on the fact that the author, Lord Kingju, has also begun writing sonnets in the past 5 years, with the most heated debate surrounding the appropriate format and type of poem. The poetry of this era was primarily religious hymns. Whether it was the Church of Light on the northern shore of the Inner Sea, the cult of the Earth God in the far west, the Church of Nature in the far north, or the Church of Flame on the southern continent, the standards were nearly identical. The longer the poem, the better. Anything less than 30 lines was considered a poem, and the more quotations from scripture, the better. Ideally, each line should have a source. Shorter poems of 10 to 20 lines also existed, but these were used by traveling singers to entertain at banquets and make money in taverns, and were not considered elegant. It wasn't until the advent of the Wesson Daily, with its limited space, that poems under 20 lines began to flourish. After 2 years of development, the dominant length of poem was 14 lines. These sonnets varied in format, primarily including 4, 4, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 2, and 8-6, and featured a wide variety of rhyme schemes. Lord Kingju, in particular, wrote poems with a wide variety of formats and rhyme schemes. Some thought one was better, others thought another was more appealing, and the debate raged on. Frederick simply listened silently, a smile on his face. After about an hour, Yvette, feeling as if she had neglected her distant guest, asked Frederick, "Have you read Lady Kingju's poetry?" Frederick replied, "Her poetry is my Sardinian textbook." This was no nonsense. Readers knew Kingju as a pen name, but only a select few knew her true identity, including Frederick. It was impossible for him not to recognize her, because this Kingju was Katie, the eldest daughter of his master, Richardner, heir to the most powerful underworld family in the southern Sardinian kingdom, and the second largest shareholder of the Wesson State Paper Group. Chapter 300, Literary Works of True Feelings. The sun gradually shifted westward, and the servants erected shade curtains in the garden to shield the host and guests from the sun. Everyone was delighted that Frederick had read King Joe's poem and wanted to hear what readers from the far north thought. Oh, right, Eamon suddenly remembered. I heard that Lord King Joe has settled in your state of Wesson. Is he married and has children? Frederick simply smiled. He couldn't tell them that his senior sister had suffered from postpartum depression and had resorted to beating herself to get through that time. I don't pry into the author's private life, he said calmly. It's not good to intrude on other people's lives. Annis punched Eamon hard and said, a little annoyed, that's right. Don't dwell on these things. The others shared the same sentiment and berated Eamon for 5 minutes, only to relent when he promised to treat them to a seafood dinner the next day. Yvette asked Frederick again, I heard that Lady Kingjo is retiring. Is that true? Everyone around her took this news seriously. This rumor had been circulating among book lovers since last year, and initially, no one believed it. But since it came from several writers in the Kingdom of Sardinia, it suddenly gained credibility. Theories abounded. Some believed she was suffering from a serious illness, others speculated she was imprisoned due to a serious political conflict, and still others speculated she was involved in the gang wars in southern Sardinia over the past 2 years. But no one could provide convincing evidence. Frederick thought for a moment and replied, I heard that the translation court in our Wesson state invited her to join, and she may have agreed. Translation court, Yvette had never heard of it, and everyone around her was puzzled. Among the many institutions in the Wesson state, the translation court was not well known outside the country. This was mainly because they had been translating books from other languages into Germanic for many years, and their influence was limited to the Rhine Confederation and the Germanic-speaking regions to the east, with a small influence in the Osmoga Empire. On the coast of the Inner Sea, since there were no books translated by the translation court for sale, little was known about it. Frederick, noticing their confusion, explained, the translation court translates a wide range of books. Previously, they translated books from other languages into Germanic, but in the coming years, they plan to begin translating books from various regions into various languages. In the near future, Sardinian works will be translated into multiple languages, allowing them to be distributed in more places. Similarly, more works from other regions will be translated into Palais, Sardinian, and other languages, allowing people to access more foreign works. Really? Yvette looked excited. So, soon we'll be able to read Gallic poetry and novels in Palais. Frederick smiled and nodded. Language transmission is influenced not only by cultural traditions but also by geography and trade. The local language here is similar to that of Kush, and because trade with Sardinia is prosperous, many people speak Sardinian. However, with limited ties to Gaul, few people here know Gallic. Among the locals present, only one girl knows a little. Frederick had been exchanging letters monthly with his pen pal Françoise from the Kingdom of Gaul for the past few years. So he was naturally familiar with the Gallic language and had witnessed the kingdom's cultural flourishing through their interactions. It was understandable that Yvette was interested in this. However, he and Françoise had been arguing for 6 months last year over a correspondence, and he planned to meet up while on his trip. Yvette brought the conversation back to the theme of the tea party. After taking a sip of tea, she asked Frederick, Ms. Kingjo's poetry has been changing a lot in the past 2 years, and it hasn't settled. What are your thoughts? Frederick replied earnestly, I think she's been influenced by the Duke of Wesson. Yvette was surprised by this statement, as many believed she was constantly experimenting and improving, while a few thought her skills were insufficient and unable to establish a consistent style. Each had their own reasons. Others felt the same way, most were curious, while others seemed a little angry. Frederick said seriously, a few years ago, the Duke of Wesson published a book called Marchpart Poems. In his preface, he argued that what truly moves people in literary works, whether poetry, novels, or drama, is the spiritual core, and all technical techniques serve this spiritual core. Most of the people present were confused, seemingly unfamiliar with the book. Although Frederick was renowned for his military prowess, his political skills were studied, and his business exploits were often emulated. No one in the literary world would look upon him with any respect. Naturally, his poetry collection drew little interest, not to mention the fact that the title itself had nothing to do with literature. But there is still a readership. Anna seemed to have found a soulmate and said excitedly, yes, that's what Duke Wesson said. He also said that literary works should not be about persuading others, but about infecting readers with true feelings. Indeed, his poems have all kinds of formats, and the rhyme patterns change from time to time, but each one reads very smoothly, and you can understand the meaning of the poem after reading it once. Frederick Guy von Wesson smiled aside. He first read his poems to the cook, gardener and others in his home. He would consider it a success only when they understood it. Anne is his fiancée, Eamon, curiously asked, "When did you buy it?" "I haven't heard you mention it before," Anna's replied. "Grandpa bought it." He would laugh and cry while reading it, and he'd always clean his sword after each reading. I was curious, so I took a look. The poems in it are all about the military. Besides battles, there's also a lot about life in the army. There are soldiers missing their families, and there's even a poem about someone coordinating their laundry to go after it's been washed and hung out to dry. It's quite interesting. Her father was a knight commander, her grandfather was the military backbone of the Valley territory, and her grandmother was Count Valizent. Everyone took the old man's words seriously. The atmosphere at the tea party was very informal, and the topic suddenly changed again. Everyone asked about Frederick's poetry collection. As the host, Yvette didn't change the subject again. After a while of discussion, someone asked, could those poems have been paid by Duke Wesson? It wasn't impossible. Some nobles would do such things to save face. Frederick rolled his eyes at the man and said disdainfully, "You underestimate Duke Wesson. The commander comes to the company 5 to 10 days a month, eating, living, and training with the ordinary soldiers. The content of his poems is based on real experiences." Then he laughed. "Miss Anna's just mentioned that someone's clothes were taken while drying. I was just too anxious to take their clothes one time. The commander often says that literary creation isn't something you create by sitting at a desk with a quill in your mouth, but by engaging with life, experiencing it, and elevating it." Everyone was amazed. Such a statement had never occurred to them. One girl said, "That's true. Lord Kingsley's poems over the past 2 or 3 years have all been about everyday things, and each one reflects his deep affection for the people around him and for life." The others nodded in agreement. A thought suddenly occurred to Yvette, but it flashed by and she couldn't grasp it. They chatted for a while longer when a servant suddenly ran over in a panic and whispered something in Yvette's ear. Yvette's face fell, and just as she was about to say something, a middle-aged man in a red robe strode over. He was a fire church priest with a C-shaped hairline and a stern expression. Following him was a young monk carrying a tray. The middle-aged priest quickly reached the carpet, and Frederick stood up with the others. Seeing the buck the sea breeze returning to harbor lying on the carpet, he snorted in displeasure, and Yvette could only lower her head. "Don't indulge in the mind-destroying poison of the pagans." The middle-aged priest looked furious, glaring at Frederick, as if he was poisoning the minds of the pure young followers of the fire church. Yvette replied respectfully, "I'll remember your teachings, teacher. I won't do it again next time." The middle-aged priest waved his hand, and the monk behind him approached Yvette with a tray. On the tray was a red-covered book, and judging by the title, it seemed to contain religious exhortations. "These are the books you should read," the middle-aged priest said solemnly. "Don't read those messy books anymore," Yvette respectfully agreed. The middle-aged priest nodded in satisfaction and left the garden with his men in the sunset. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.